Good evening. Good to see everybody back in the regular meeting. We see our new environment that we have here this evening. Glad that you all made it. This is the agenda of the Belton City Council, February 9th, 2021. At first, we're going to do our work session. Work session is now in order. What are the items we have for discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight, the first item that we have is the 2020 Annual Crime Report, and Chief James Person will be providing that to you. James?
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I am going to be sharing my screen via Zoom tonight. This is something that is new to me, and we are going to make every effort to get this done. And where is it?
Yeah.
I think you need to turn your video on.
Now at the bottom of your screen, you should have the green share screen button.
Yeah, I did that, and the report that was just in this file is right there now. Let's see. Now can you see it?
We can see it.
Technology, there we go. Okay, this is the 2020 annual report for the police department. It's made up of the Missouri, what they call MIBRS, Missouri Incident-Based Reporting System, and it is what we actually report to the state of Missouri and the FBI for their NIBRS, which is the National Incident-Based Reporting System. All of these numbers are then compared to our numbers historically. I'm not going to go through and read this entire report to you. It is the complete report that we put out late last week. Alexa shared it with each of you in her weekly update. This is an expanded report from what is actually included in your agenda packet. So this is what I will actually be referring to. The report starts out with a preface page, and we talk about the year 2020. I don't have to tell any of you all what a different year this was. I would like to thank all of our employees for stepping up the way that they have. We've all learned to do business in a completely different way, just like everyone has in their own particular businesses. We have learned to use additional equipment. We have used the Aeroclave equipment that the city purchased in order to try to minimize the infection rate here. We have had a number of times where we have had to go into isolation and quarantine, and we have had employees that have been ill at different times. But for the most part, we've been able to continue carrying out our business, and I applaud all of our employees for the hard work that they have exhibited during this time. I would also like to thank Lieutenant Norman Shriver. Norm takes care of our IT. He also commands our communications and our records division, and he puts together all of the data for these reports every year. So I would really like to recognize all the hard work that Norm does. I'd like to start out with this information on page 1 and sort of a caveat. It seems to be popular discussion right now, a popular narrative to talk about our burgeoning or ever increasing crime rate in the city of Belton. Belton has not had an ever increasing crime rate. The last time that we showed an increase was several years ago. You can look at the 5-year uh, collection of data there, and it shows that we are down for the last few years. This year, we're down substantially in the number of total incidents, the number of calls for service, and the number of arrests. Part of that, particularly in the number of arrests, is because we stopped fewer cars. We stopped fewer cars because we did not want to have as many face-to-face confrontations or contacts with the public, and we minimized our risk to employees and the risk to the public by trying to limit some of those contacts that we had. However, we continued answering calls. We continued taking enforcement action when appropriate, and we are showing a decline in the number of calls for service, the number of incidents, and the number of arrests. Next, we have graphs that show that same information. Next, on page 3, we go to the 8 major crimes that are reported to the FBI every year. And we show, like I've talked in previous years, it does not take a large number of offenses to make a big difference in those annual numbers. However, I will point out that in total violent crime, we show over a 30% decrease in 2020. And in all of the crimes reported in the total modified crime index, we show a decrease of almost 10% for the year. And I think that is indicative of the work that we've been doing at the police department. It's indicative of the work that our citizens are doing through Neighborhood Watch. And it also has something to do with COVID and the response of the community and the fact that we had more people home during the course of the year. However, over that 5-year trend there, we can show that our crime index has been going down for the last 5 years. So that narrative of the ever increasing crime rate does not hold true there either. We just have some more graphs display that same information. Next up would be the traffic report. There were a number of fewer car stops. Normally, in years where there are fewer car stops and less traffic enforcement, it also means that, or has shown that we've had more traffic crashes. That was not the case this year. This year, we actually had a decrease in the number of tickets by over 16, almost 17%, but we also showed a decrease in the number of traffic crashes by almost 16%. I think a lot of that has to do with less traffic on the roads at times, and it has to do with the amount of driving that was going on and what was going on in our commercial area also. These other numbers are just pointing out the same, that we were down in total summonses, down in the number of accidents, down in both hazardous moving violations and in total summonses. More graphs. As you go through the rest of this report, for the most part, these are all reports from our more specialized units, information going down. This is in the jail. And the only other thing I really wanted to show in the jail was the marked decrease that we had in the number of prisoners going through the jail. And a lot of that had to do with the number of arrests that were made and the number of summonses that were issued, and the amount of traffic that was decreased through our municipal court. If you remember, for a couple of months, we did not even have court. And so we were not holding as many people in jail, and we continue to hold fewer people in jail, not only our own cases, which is shown over here in this 1406, but also in the number of prisoners that we were holding for other jurisdictions. That was down tremendously also because other jurisdictions, other agencies are not arresting and holding people either. The rest of this goes back to reports to and from our specialized units, animal control, the internal affairs. There's a report in there from our investigations division. All in all, it will show that we continued to be active. However, those activities were down in the last year, which corresponded to fewer crimes being investigated and fewer arrests being made. I would answer any questions that you all might have at this time about the report, or if you think of some later, I would be more than happy to discuss those with you over the next, say, 6 weeks.
Oh, questions? Do we have questions of Chief? Comments? It's really good to have the data and that it does show the story that we've really had a pretty good year to decline from 5 years down. So congratulations. Hope this next 6 weeks is calm. Be really good.
Mayor?
You
I
have,
hope particularly the next 3 weeks are,
yeah,
because that's when Chief Lyons will be here after the next 3 weeks, and he'll get acclimated, and the pictures are going to come off the wall.
City Manager, what do you got?
Chief, is this report on your website now, or will it be on your website, so if people want to look at it more closely?
It will be, yes. We will post this on the website. I believe it'll also be available through the Facebook page.
Okay, thank you.
Good stuff. Okay, with that, B, economic, what do you got?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The council will recall about 18 to 24 months ago, during our work session, similar to this, we went over a draft of the economic development policy, and the council provided feedback to Carolyn and to Sid Douglas, our economic development attorney. As a result of those comments, and along with recent city projects, Sid and Carolyn have made final revisions to the policy, and I believe they're going to discuss those this evening. Carolyn, do you have more information?
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Can you hear me? It's hard to tell through this mask here, so. Yeah, so in the agenda, the review of the city's economic development policy begins on page 8, and I want everyone to know that all of the red line changes are based on prior comments that were made by the City Council. And one of the other reasons that we do this review periodically is to make sure that the City of Belton is still in compliance with the ever-changing state statutes. Legislation can happen, so it's just a good idea to review this document. So I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the modifications. We have Sid Douglas, who is going to be joining us in just a moment via Zoom. He couldn't be here with us tonight, and he's going to do a little bit of a deeper dive. So the high-level overview of the modifications, you'll notice that the policy's gone from 42 to 30 pages. That 30 pages does have an attached pre-application at the end. The application and review process was added at the beginning. We had it mentioned for each and every incentive, so it was very repetitive, and it added some just unnecessary length to the document itself. We have also updated the maps on the under the enhanced enterprise zone, and again, Sid is going to go deeper into this, but we have removed any reference to the state incentives and focus solely on local incentives, because that's what we have control of. We don't have control over the state. And after further consideration, we are going to recommend an additional modification to the enhanced enterprise zone abatement. we didn't want to make these modifications or redline it without bringing it to your attention, so Sid is going to do that in his presentation, but I just wanted to let you know that's why. We didn't want to make the change without having discussed it with you first. Under Chapter 100, there were 1.5 pages that covered the level of abatement, and it was just the level of specificity of it was enormous, and so we reduced that, or actually eliminated that. And we also deleted the section on New Markets Tax Credit Program because it's a federal program. It's not controlled at all by by City Council, and so we thought that it was best to go ahead and remove that. And then again, we added the application to the back of the policy so that people didn't have to search for it. And so at this time, I'd like to introduce Sid Douglas, City's Economic Development Attorney, and he is going to provide a brief explanation as to why these changes are being made.
Thank you, Caroline. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, Sid.
Yes, Sid, thank you.
Okay. Carolyn provided a good overview of some of the big picture things, but there are some other things I wanted to draw your attention to in particular as some of the revisions have been made. Most of them have been made in response to the questions that were posed to the council when the policy was first being discussed. But if you'll go to page 4 of the marked up version of the economic development policy, some of the things that we've included are basically input from learning or hearing ideas that are going on in other communities. But on page 4, in number 7 that's been added is something that if people are going to be providing, or we're going to be providing incentives for economic development projects in the community, that we wanted to include some information that there will be some kind of request to include in their budget for their construction project art or decorative improvements to help improve the aesthetics of these projects as they come forward. So that one thing there. On page 6, one of the things that we talked about at the last council meeting was that we want to make sure that there's no credit risk to the city for doing TIF type projects. So we added that insert at the end of section 6 there. The other part of the discussions when we were talking about TIFs is that we would have TIF plans that would contemplate at least 25% of a payment in lieu of tax that would go to all the impacted or affected taxing districts. So that primarily is for the benefit of the school district, but we want to make sure we got that added. The next major change that we've got, if you go to page 12, there's a lot of information in here, and as Carolyn pointed out, a lot of these changes are just eliminating some of the state programs that are sometimes connected with the local programs. So we took out the reference to the Missouri Works program about the details of how that works. But one of the things that, as Carolyn pointed out, that there's on page 12 at the bottom, and then also on page 16, some of the requirements in the Missouri Works program that lots of times works with the EEZ stuff had some requirements about creating 2 new employees and an average wage. We would recommend to the council at this point, and after doing some of the other revisions, that we eliminate the specific jobs requirement and also the specific amount of investment, so that the council has the ability to impose whatever requirements or restrictions they want to impose for receiving the incentive. There is provisions in the statute to require that you provide 50% property tax abatement for improvements to the real property being made over a period of 10 years. And having a requirement of just 2 jobs and $100,000 investment in order to get that level of incentive didn't really seem to make a lot of sense. And so it's probably more incumbent upon the city and in its best interest to increase the level of the jobs requirements as well as the investment in order to obtain that level of incentive. That would, as I said, on the bottom of page 12, there's a reference to the qualified business maintaining 2 new employees and a $100,000 investment. We would take out those reference to the new employees and the $100,000 investment. That also appears on page 16. And I think Carolyn has some proposed language to change those sections of the policy if that's what the council's desire is. Going to page 22 of the marked up version, we've got some additional information we provided in paragraph 3 that the determination of the level of incentive will be primarily focused on the level of investment being made, the number of high quality jobs being created, and also whether any of the businesses that would be included in a Chapter 100 type transaction would still have sales tax generation capabilities, so that there would be other revenue sources that the city would be receiving as part of the project and it come into your community. We saw that as an impact of some of the development that's gone in Southview Commerce Center, which was unexpected, but a nice benefit that has turned out that even though we've provided significant property tax abatement, the businesses are expected to be generating significant sales taxes from sales being made and distributed from, and product being distributed from that facility. Carolyn made reference, we've taken out all of some of these details about what level of abatement is being provided and for what length of period of time with respect to certain specific dollar amounts of investments or jobs being created, so that we have more flexibility to deal with circumstances as they're presented to the community. I think that is it for the more detailed information that we've provided in response to comments we received and some of the other circumstances that have been presented to the city. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Councilwoman Davidson.
I have a few questions. I received a question from a constituent who had questions regarding the EEZ. And actually a few of these maps, when you look at them, for example, the enhanced enterprise zone, if you look at that map, it overlays areas where there are residential. So I just want to make sure that in looking at these maps, we're not actually allowing somebody to drop a business like in the middle of a neighborhood, for example. That would be on page 19.
Yeah, that would not be the plan. This is just identifying zones that have been recognized primarily because of population and income criteria as being eligible for enhanced enterprise zones. So they would not change any of the requirements or policies that the city has about trying to make sure development occurs as consistent with the comprehensive and master plan for the community. So just because they're zoned doesn't mean that there would be businesses that would be dropped in this area. It just means that they're eligible for the enhanced enterprise zone.
I had one other question. Let's see here. Sorry. Let's see, on page 12, regarding the requirement for annual review of TIFs, but there's no description of what happens if the TIF is found to be out of compliance. So this person is really just asking if we should make that process clear in this document.
The details of what some of the annual reports will be premised off of the development agreement. So to the extent that there's requirements for a certain level of investments, there are certain kinds of either retail or commercial space that's contemplated. And then in addition, if there is some kind of jobs requirement that is being imposed in order to obtain the incentive, most of those things, or those items will be spelled out in the development agreement. And so that would provide the map of what the annual report would be showing, that the redevelopment project is being developed and consistent with the plan, the development agreement, and then it can report that on an annual basis. To the extent that there's non-compliance, there would be remedies that would be included in the development agreement that could be imposed, including the ability to either terminate the TIF or to reduce the incentives, and that would all be covered in the development agreement of what those potential consequences would be.
So just a general question then, because we review those yearly, and I feel like the follow-up is the same for each of them if they're deemed underperforming or not performing. Those developers then come in and see us. Is it the same process for all of them?
Sid, I can take that. So the 5-year annual report that we present, that is by state statute. So we do that, provide that to City Council for council to make the determination as to whether they're making satisfactory progress or not. And then prior to, and then of course you make that determination that night via a motion. And then what we do is, if they are not meeting the deadline, the construction deadline, then they would have to come back in and request an amendment to the TIF.
I guess and that's the same for all of them. So I wonder, I mean, is it worth adding that language to this document? I don't know, just posing the question, thank you.
Other questions? Councilman Trutzel.
Back on this same issue. If we were to say they're not in compliance and they fail to do so, are you trying to tell me that the owner of the property that developed it is kaput? It doesn't make logical sense to me that the guy's got millions of dollars out there already invested in this property, then all of a sudden we're going to say, I'm sorry, you're not making good enough attempts at this thing. And then one particular TIF program, we worked with that particular developer, and over time we even had suggested that they change who is marketing that property and that kind of thing. I think there's been attempts on those things, but what you're really getting down to, what we're discussing here is, if they fail, what's going to happen to that property? Who's going to be responsible for that? It just, some of that stuff doesn't make a whole lot of sense, to me anyhow.
I think every circumstance will be different. As you know, from a historical standpoint, over the last few years, we've had a number of the developers where the Price Chopper is located, some of the development around where the Menards is, as well as the Y Belton development out where Sports Academy is. But they've had to come in and explain where they're at, why they're not meeting their schedules, and what progress they're being made. there are a number of circumstances that weigh in on what the reasoning for that is. A lot of it is dictated by the economy at different times. But, the leverage that the city has is that the development agreement provides that they're supposed to be doing certain things. And if they don't, then you have the ability to declare a default and then try to pursue remedies. The most drastic of all those would be just the complete termination of all incentive payments to be made to the developer. And that we've never been in a position to need to do that. And it would have to be pretty drastic circumstance where we would probably recommend that from the staff and from my position as outside counsel for that kind of course of action. But there are a lot of places to land between not doing anything as opposed to completely terminating all the incentives, and having them come in and explain that to the council gives you the ability to evaluate those circumstances, whether you want to do some extensions or modifications or amendments to keep them in a position where you hold their feet to the fire. And then if it still don't meet those requirements, then they come back and explain again. And I think that has worked well for the city in the past. But the development agreement does give you the ability to impose those kind of consequences. And so that gives you the leverage to deal with them in what makes the most sense for the city.
So, in your experience, generally, how many times has that really occurred where somebody has gone into default and the city has gone back and tried to take control of it? To me, it doesn't seem realistic.
Yeah, there would be very few TIF projects that if any, that I can think of where the city got into a position where they took over the project. Most of it would be likely as either some kind of reduction of the incentive because of their failure to be able to implement what they said they were going to get, as opposed to actually taking over a project or completely terminating all the incentives. There's very few, if any, that I can think of where the developers have not committed significant resources. There's a lot that may have missed the mark at least a little bit from what they originally contemplated, but not so much in the sense that it created any potential consequence of maybe the whole development completely failing.
A lot of that money that come for that particular project went down to the new highway that's going from 58 to 49. The roadway out front of Price Chopper. A lot of that money went in there. So we already got some of that back as kind of even though we're not out of that particular TIF, a lot of that money has already been spent in the city, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And every project is a little bit different. Some of them have a deeper element that includes a lot of public improvements, and the one at the Price Chopper there at Y Highway and 58 was one that they contributed significantly to making some of the road and other public infrastructure improvements in that area. Others are more focused on reimbursement of private costs, but almost every TIF has got some element of both public and private improvements, and the weighting between public and private reimbursable costs varies depending upon the nature of the site and what infrastructure is in place and what's necessary to make the project work.
Thank you.
Other questions? Comments? Carolyn, when was the last TIF that Belton's done? What year?
That would have been, I believe it was late 2014, and that was Cedar Tree.
Okay, so we haven't done it in like 7 years then?
Correct.
Okay. Other questions? Seeing none. What do we got next? We have, who you got? City manager? What we got? Go ahead.
There's a motion we need a motion to amend to the city of Belton economic development policy that is on the sheet of paper in front of you on page 11 and page 14.
Don't we do that later?
So that'll come up under resolutions, that it's a couple pages away. That's okay. But that's a great recognition of that.
Glad.
Yeah. So the resolution that we have does have a couple of changes. Those items are in front of you tonight. So when that motion does come up, it'll need to be amended for those changes. And that's when that will occur. Thank you, Councilman Trutzel.
So what we got next?
The next item on the work session, Mayor, is the review of the overhead allocation, and I'm going to turn it over to Sheila.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. I want to start with the fiscal year 22 budgeted overhead allocation. You should be able to see that on your screen. This is also included in the budget book. It is in the general fund. And if you're interested in looking, it's on page 3, but it's also on your screen in front of you. And so basically, I just want to remind everyone what the overhead allocation is. Basically, the overhead allocation, the general fund pays a lot of expenses on behalf of the entire city, including departments that are not located within the general fund. And a good example of this would be a headquarters and convenience stores, maybe like Quick Trip. And so if you have a headquarters in Oklahoma for Quick Trip, the headquarters is taking care of doing the accounts payable and the payroll, doing the legal work, taking care of the board of directors and their expenses, and a lot of functions on behalf of all of the different convenience stores. So all of those expenses that the headquarters does would be these expenses in the general fund that the general fund is paying for all of these departments that are performing work for the different funds. And so what the city does is they take the entire budget from each of these departments and total them up, and those are the expenses that need to be allocated to all of the different departments in the city that are having work done on their behalf. And in my example of the headquarters and the convenience store, the headquarters isn't actually generating revenues. So the company needs those services to be performed, but there are no revenues that are being directly generated from those services. And so the way that those expenses get paid are by allocating all of those indirect costs to those different gas stations who are actually doing the generation of revenues. And so that is the methodology that the city started a long time ago, allocating these expenditures to the different funds based on share of revenue. And you can see the revenues for the budgeted revenues for fiscal year 22 here, and the percentage of the total revenue. And if you allocate these expenditures out, then here is the share that each of these funds would pay to reimburse the general fund for the general fund paying these expenses. Before I came here, the council had made a decision to cap the overhead allocation amounts that the proprietary and special revenue funds were paying to reimburse the general fund. And so even though the allocation based on revenues is much higher, at some point the city council decided to cap those amounts. And I was not here at that time, But my guess is that the reason that the council decided to cap the amount, let's use Gulf Fund as a good example, because if the Gulf Fund had to pay $111,133 to the general fund revenues would then have to be loaned back to the Gulf Fund to pay those expenses, because the Gulf Fund would not be able to pay their share, if that makes sense. And so at some point, the city capped those amounts, and it has been capped the entire time since I've been here. Any questions about that?
How long ago, how long has this been in place?
The overhead allocation
Before you ever came, how far back does it go?
to the 90s at least, possibly longer than that.
Okay. Councilman Clark.
And it doesn't mean we can't change it. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to keep bringing up my friends to the east and their overhead allocation, even if you use the $2.4 million that it's supposed to be paying, is about 1.5 more than what they take out. And I think they take out the overhead allocation for the people that actually work for those funds. So if you're looking at the water and sewer fund, some of it would be the public works director, or the, part of the finance director's position would be paid for the overhead. So it's not a calculated thing like that. It's actually separated and broken out exactly where those funds are going. So going back, it's been going on for 30 years or longer. Doesn't mean this 9-member board can't change things.
Well, I think that's a great point, but when you were on the council, this is the way you did it a long time ago. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, we can change things. Okay, other questions or comments? Yes, sir. Councilman Finn.
You mentioned it's been capped since the 90s, is that right?
No, it's only been capped since, I believe, right before, when the recession happened. I believe that was when the council decided to cap.
Okay.
Before the recession, they were not capping it, I don't believe.
Thank you.
Questions? Moving on.
Okay, and so.
I have one.
Where are we?
Councilman Lathrop.
What are we
Okay.
talking about on caps? That means the maximum you're gonna get?
The maximum amount that each fund is being asked to reimburse the general fund. So for example, by the calculation, the park fund would be, their share would be $282,482, but their amount is being capped at $53,000.
Okay, because that was what I was wondering, because I served on the park board for 19 years, and the fund in that time was around $16,000.
It has,
It wasn't capped at that time, it was way down.
we increased the parks amount. These amounts have been increased for very specific reasons. So the parks got increased a few years ago when they started using the in-house city's IT. And so they agreed to fund the part-time position so that they could stop outsourcing their IT services. It was a savings for them, and it allowed the city to have a backup IT person to fill in when our full-time person was off on vacation or sick or unavailable. So there were specific reasons that, based on cost, like Councilman Clark was mentioning, if those have changed, that would be why.
And they also got a sales tax for the park in that time too.
Okay.
Councilwoman Davis.
To Councilman Clark's point, can you talk about what would happen potentially if we just decided we're not going to collect any of this anymore? What would happen to the general fund?
These these amounts that are being paid to reimburse the general fund are helping pay those expenses. And so either expenses would need to be cut or other revenues would need to be increased in order to not affect the general fund.
And let's see, $4.8 million, what would that do to us next year, or well, the year that we're talking about?
The only budgets, that are, that exceed in the general fund, that exceed those amounts are public safety budgets. So basically you would be eliminating the cost of several of the smaller departments, or the total of all of these departments, obviously.
One second, I'll get you. Because she's pondering this. Are you done?
Yeah, I mean, you've picked up on my thinking face.
Yes, I was. Well, the mask, it's really tough.
I was actually gonna ask one more thing. So can you scroll down a little bit, please? So if you look at the water fund right there, and what is that, 815, let's see, based on revenue, so $1.125 million. Do you have your calculator?
We can do it in Excel right here.
So what, if we were not, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but, so say we don't collect the 1.125, right? Can you break that out into what that equals per household?
The 1,125,796 divided by 7,200-ish customers is $156.36 a year.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Clark, you were next.
I never said anything about getting rid of the overhead allocation because I do believe there's people up at City Hall that actually deal with the water and sewer funds, that we need to pay for those people. I'm just saying that we should be more transparent of where that money's going instead of having a broad range like that. And I also go back to, I don't know, I go back and look at the legislative fund. I mean, we put $1 million in there that, we never been $1.8 million. So, I mean, two years ago, the actual budget was $810,000. So, I mean, you take that $1 million out, now it's 3.8. What's that actually do to our numbers?
Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I'm going to go on to talk about the true up of the last
That was my
3
next
years,
question.
but
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we finish with this, if anybody has any questions on the budgeted amounts.
Okay.
Okay. So when Alexa got here, based on discussions that she and the mayor had and have been having about overhead allocation the last few years, I was asked to go and do a true up. Basically, the overhead allocation, what we have always done is the transfers have been made based on budgeted amounts. Prior to Alexa getting here, we never went back and trued up after the final numbers had come in. And so, and this is smaller. So basically what I did is, we're in the middle of fiscal year 2021. So I am starting with fiscal year 2020. And this is the same, this is what we budgeted. We budgeted for the total expenses to be allocated were $3.8 million. If we look at what actually happened for the year, there were only actually spent $3.4 million. So there were fewer expenses that needed to be allocated in fiscal year 2020. If we take the actual revenues, these were the budgeted revenues. The budgeted revenues totaled $58.9 million. the actual revenues that came in during fiscal year 2020 were 56.7. And so while our cap and what was allocated, if you go back and you true up, then actually the water fund should have only transferred over $815,025, which is $4,206 less than it actually transferred over. The other funds, the wastewater fund, still transferred $283,000 less than it should have based on the formula. The golf fund, $82,000, street fund, $220,000 less, and park fund, $193,000 less. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Councilwoman Davidson.
Yeah, so I know this is something I'm familiar with because we do it in my company. If I have to provide services to another department, I bill them for it. I guess I'm just wondering, because the way we do it, if I receive a request, I know how many hours it's going to be taking, and I may bill just hourly. But then if it's happening a lot, then I might look at how much of my time overall is this taking up. So say it takes up 10% of my year. So how are we getting these percentages? Has the city at any point, because the percentages have been around for a long time, so I'm wondering, how did we come up with these? Was somebody sitting down in the department and saying, hey, I've looked at our schedule and we're spending 15% of our time servicing water and that kind of a thing? So how did we arrive at the percentages?
It's just simply share of revenue. So it's each fund's revenue, percentage of revenue from the total revenue for all those funds that are sharing, to allocate all of the expenses in those departments. And there are multiple different ways to calculate overhead allocation, and Councilman Clark is absolutely correct. It's a council decision on what the council wants to do. And while we were truing up, we went ahead and allocated the Public Works billing amounts, just to make sure. So when I first got here, Public Works billing was actually included and being allocated out to the park fund and the golf fund, except the golf is not paying anything, and the general fund. And the Public Works director at that time asked that it be the Public Works fund or department be taken out of that allocation and instead be allocated directly to water, street, and wastewater. And the reason for that was because the Public Works Department and the General Fund entirely supports those three funds, if that makes sense. And so I trued that up as well. And you can see, basically, because the expenses for budgeted were $1.1 million, but the actual amount that was spent in fiscal year 20 was only $956,713. The street, wastewater, and water fund over transferred to the general fund for that part. When I netted them together, the water fund had overpaid the general fund by $66,806, but all of the other funds had underpaid the general fund. And then I went back and I did this true up for 2019. I won't bore you guys with like all the details. I'll just show you the end result for the year of 2019. All of the funds underpaid the general fund except for the water fund, a total in fiscal year 2019, $93,049. And in fiscal year 2018, again, only the water fund overtransferred by $70,938. And the reason that, while I was actually working on trying to explain this to the state auditor's office and doing this detail, and I found that there was when we very first started doing this in 2018, there was a formula error in this part of the calculation up here, and we were using not the total water, the water revenue line, but a cell a couple of rows up, and so this is new news to us. We did not know that the water fund was over transferring, and only found out last week when I found that formula error. And so, now the council needs to decide, it's your guys' decision. Do you want to have the funds that are underpaying transfer more to the general fund? Do you want the water fund who over transferred to get paid back by the general fund? What would the council like to see happen? And what I will do is I will bring a budget amendment ordinance to the council next week, or not next week, our next meeting, for the council to approve a budget amendment if you so desire, or if you choose to leave it, then there would be no budget amendment.
Has this been, okay, Councilman Van Winkle, you're first.
Just to clarify something on when you were talking about the allocation based on the revenues, does that mean that each department or each fund there has the same percent, and is it a percentage of the revenues where we get this figure?
Yes,
And what's that percentage?
it changes based on their actual revenues. So it's it's their percentage
Well,
of
the percentage doesn't change, does it?
the percentage will change if the fund has higher revenues, then they would pay more of the expenses. It's just like that example with the Quick Trip.
So where do you get that number, what they pay?
So you
I
take
thought you said it was a percentage of the fund.
okay, so you calculate this calculation, this 31.83%. It's this $15.6 million divided by the total revenue of $49 million. So all of these will equal 100%. The total of these percentages equal 100%, and
So
they
if a particular fund like shoots through the roof for some squirrely reason, their percent of what they're paying for these administrative costs go up, even though
Yes.
maybe nothing's really changed other than revenues coming in. I mean,
yes.
Is that equitable? Is that make sense? It just doesn't seem right to me. It seems like the expenses should reflect more of what services they're paying for, what they're getting.
So I wasn't here back when
Okay,
when
I
got started,
understand.
but here's
I
my
understand you weren't here when all this happened.
here's what I
But
think.
financially, from a finance standpoint, I would think maybe there's a better practice or a better way to do it.
Well, I think that the practice that is currently happening is a good one, and here is why. Because if all of these expenses have to occur, the expenses that are being allocated, none of these departments have fees. So all of the funds that are bringing in revenue have to share how that's being paid for. And so I think it is revenue share is just how the city chose to do it, and there's nothing wrong. I actually think that it's a very good idea, and it's a very fair way to allocate.
Could I jump?
Although this was something that came up before you were here, you don't see any problem with that practice?
I don't. It took me, I also have to say that I had never seen it be that overhead allocation costs being allocated this way. I worked at a county prior to coming here, and that's not how it was done. When it just happened that when Alexa got here, I went to a Missouri Society of CPAs seminar for CPE, and they were actually talking about allocating overhead costs based on revenue share. That was the first time I had thought about it. That's the first time I had even thought about it. And it made sense. I never understood why in our budget, when we had these capped amounts, the revenues were listed in the budget document. And all of a sudden, while I was sitting in that seminar, it made sense. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what some finance director long before me had started. And now I understand why. Since that time, there's a GFOA list serve, and there are many cities that do it this way. So it is a common practice. And since that Missouri Society of CPAs seminar, I went to another one that was put on by Reuben Brown, and they also were talking about allocating overhead costs this way. So.
Is it during this event where you realize this and I assume going to some kind of seminar for training or whatever?
Yes.
Are there downsides to doing it this way, and are there pros for doing it other ways?
They actually were talking about how this is one of the best ways to do it, to make sure that you are able to always recover the costs that it's taking, because as these revenues grow, it should be costing more money, and those funds would need to hire more staff in order to service the additional work that is coming from those additional revenues. And that makes sense as you're increasing fees to do infrastructure costs and things. There are going to be more costs related to that. And please don't think that I'm arguing one way or another. I am really just trying to answer your guys' questions so that you can make the best decision.
Could you explain the quick
Appreciate it.
trip method again? Because he wasn't here at that meeting when we used that example. Do you remember the quick trip example I'm talking about?
Uh-huh.
Could you explain that in a brief way?
So if Quick Trip has a headquarters where they are, and at that headquarters, they are servicing, doing accounts payable and payroll and paying for the legal work and all those administrative costs on behalf of the Quick Trip gas station stores. Because the Quick Trip headquarters has to have those costs paid for, what they're doing is they are billing each of those convenience stores based on their share of revenues, exactly like we are doing.
Councilwoman Davidson, do you do it similar that way with your business?
Yeah, I mean, the company that I work for, we do it that way, but actually, in my household, we allocate this way. So it's based on the percentage that my husband and I each contribute to an account to cover our expenses is based on the size of each of our paychecks. So whoever makes more money puts in the bigger share. So I mean, I get it both ways.
Okay, Councilman Savage, you were next.
Yeah, when we were talking about the percentages, Sheila, how do we get that the water fund is over and all the other funds are negative to what, how does that percentage land that way? Is it has to do with the, let me just leave it at that. How does it land that way?
It-
The water fund is always over, or the last 2 years it has been.
3.
3 years it has been. The other ones are under. Using that method, how does that happen?
It, it's just that the amount that was being transferred, the capped amount that was being budgeted to be transferred, just happened to be more than what the actual amount should have been. So you could say, and let's look at, here's one thing we could do really quickly. So if we take this divided by this, let's just see what percentage that is. And I just need to do a little formula here. Here's how, Councilman Savage. So, oh, but I did it yeah. So the capped amount for each of these funds is, for the park fund, it's 1.47% of the total expenses, and the street funds is only 2.71% of the total expenses. You can see that the wastewater fund is paying 17.18% of the total expenses, and the water fund is paying 22.64%. So the reason that ends up is just because the water amount that is being budgeted is higher than the wastewater and the golf, the street, and the park, and that is why.
Well, I guess it'd be a good time to say, city manager, 3 years ago, we met up until the pandemic. The mayor pro tem came in every morning. We had a meeting, and one of the things we were concerned about was overhead allocation.
That's correct. When I first came here and learning about the budget and the process that we followed, I wanted to learn, as Sheila alluded to. In my prior life, we had worked on allocation, overhead allocation. It's all cities utilize a methodology, and some people do it via staff time, which is what Councilman Clark's talking about, what Raymore does, and other cities do it via the revenue method. And so when we looked at it, we were looking at the calculation. And the reason why you and I were looking at it so closely is because we were looking at this dollar amount that comes out. And so how do you weigh that balance of your general fund that can be used for anything versus these other funds that are utilized specifically for those items? And what you told me at the time, and I don't know if you recall this, is that you were concerned about the infrastructure of the city and what we were doing. And because we looked first at the transportation department. And when we saw what the transportation department was doing and how it had already been reduced, I think it calmed, we were talking about how do we still take care of our infrastructure while we still have to take care of the day-to-day operations within the city. And Sheila was spot on when she was stating that all of those departments that provide services to those other funds that have revenue that come in, somebody has to be able to provide those services of finance, and then the legislative that even that you guys do here every week when you're reviewing the agenda and what's on the agenda and the items that you have in front of you. Those have to be taken care of. So when we sat down, one of the things that we decided to do, and I asked Sheila about it, was, is there a way to be able to true this up so that we've set it at a cap? Let's make sure that we keep with that cap. And we'd been looking at it, and every year, determining that we actually were under. So that means that those items that are negative, that they're underpaying, that dollar amount goes back into those funds that they're spending it. Somebody said, well, is the money missing? I said, oh, God, no, money's not missing. It's going into your roads, it's going into your water, it's doing maintenance, it's doing repairs, it's helping take care of the city's infrastructure that we have there. We just wanted to make sure that we were keeping it capped. The hard part is from the general fund is that while it's paying back for those other services, we wanted to make sure that we're able to provide those services. Those departments are very lean already. Your finance department and administration and the city clerk and the other departments that are listed there, there's not depth to those departments. There's one person that does that job. And we are so lean now, it's difficult for people to take any type of time off. So being able to look at that and feel confident and comfortable in how those items are being allocated, in our discussions, we were happy with where it was set, and then going back and doing the true up to make sure. And then once we found this anomaly, we wanted to be able to not only talk about the overhead allocation, but to be able to bring this to the council's attention, talk about it, and then say direction from council. How do you want to handle that amount that the water fund has overpaid? Do you want to, as Sheila said, do you want the general fund to reimburse it? Do you want the other funds that are underpaying, should they raise their allocation amount to be able to pay that back to the water? They pay it to the general fund then pays it back. What does that look like to the council, or do you just leave it the way it is and know that we've now, we're comfortable in the fact that our formulas are correct and our calculation method is, and we move forward?
The Mayor Pro Tem and I decided to have, I don't know if we even told you, had an auditor come in and talk to us in my office. If this was legal, the way we're doing everything, on proprietary funds. And he explained to us that we're doing everything legal. He said that you go to other cities, especially south. He was talking about that he worked with cities further south. It's a lot more, and it's a lot more complicated because they need this to just exist. With that, I'd like to know, why do we really compare to our neighboring cities? How about Grandview? How about Raymore, Peculiar? What about the water rates and all that? That goes along with this, because the water's a big part of this.
I'm not sure how other neighboring communities, how they're doing their allocation. I focus on the city of Belton. I generally know that they all provide an allocation, and some are going to be higher, some are going to be lower. And then you stated to talk about water rates and what they're doing. I know that I've heard from individuals that neighbors to the east are slightly lower than the city of Belton. I know that Grandview has just gone through, their rates are at or slightly above ours. And I know that the neighbors to the south are the same way. They're above, they're actually the highest in the county. But,
I'm just trying to get some comparative data because, that's the hot item this year.
my apologies, Mayor, I don't have that exact data in front of me.
Okay.
I just know that I've looked at it, reviewed it, and that's what I found.
Well, I felt good after talking to the auditor, and he told us with the proprietary funds that we were spot on and things were really good, and that really put us both at rest, so we felt really good about it. Councilman Clark.
I guess my first question is, does City of Belton and every city that buys from Kansas City pay the same amount for the water? Or do you know that?
I don't believe that it's the same. I think it's contract, like negotiated prices, but I don't know that for sure. I'm sorry.
I did.
I don't know for sure. I think it's negotiated prices, but I don't know that for sure. I think it's based on how much water we're buying, and that is what the variance is.
Well, I was just told actually today that from a public water supply who buys their water from Kansas City that says that they were supposed to get an increase this year from Kansas City, but it was rolled back because of COVID. I don't know if that happened to us or not.
I have not gotten I expect at any time the letter from Kansas City, Missouri about whether or not they are increasing our prices. Right now in the budget, because Greg had called for us to ask them what they thought they were going to do, that we are planning on a 0% increase pending hearing if Kansas City has indeed stuck with a 0% increase or if they're going to increase rates.
And the reason why Sheila says it like that is because a couple of years ago, we made a phone call and asked them what their projected rates would be. They said it would be a 0% increase, and then about 6 to 8 weeks later, we got the adjustment, and it was actually a 2%. So we had to bring it back to the council. So we say that cautiously. We hope that it's 0, but it could be, they actually, when Greg talked to them, they said it could be as little as 0 or as high as 2.
That do it? What do we got? What, you had a question? You were
It was more of a statement, Mayor.
Okay, go ahead.
I work with the public in several different cities selling homes, and I've never talked to anybody that actually loves their water rates anywhere they live. They always like to tell me it's higher than anywhere around. And so, I mean, it's subjective to what you're actually using. But I guess I did have a question for Sheila. Is it public knowledge what we pay for water from Kansas City?
Yes.
Okay, so if we're public knowledge of what we pay for our water, then we should be able to obtain the rates that have been negotiated for other municipalities around
Yes.
as well and see. And again, I understand that it could be different depending on what their level of demand or usage is in their city. So it could be a little bit less if they don't need as much, or I'm not sure how they negotiate that. But I think that's something to take in and take interest in as far as when we go to negotiate, in another 15 years on the next lease. That's all.
Councilman Lathrop.
I still, on the allocation, I'm still undecided because I've talked about this at budget sessions through the years, that I thought all of these people that are contributing should be the same %. But it's not. Water is always higher. So you're talking now they're about a couple $100,000 higher than the sewer. And we're raising the water rates to pay for something, and the raise in rates is about equal to a little over that. So, it don't make any sense to me that all of them aren't paying the same % of what they come in. That would make it simple. And now we got the water, which we're fighting to get things built with, that is paying $1 million or $100,000 more than what they should be. That's my opinion now.
Councilwoman Davidson.
So just to understand, if we were to decide that after a review that these funds are each, just for the sake of argument, using 10% of staff time, all of them down the board, and then we find that we're not transferring enough money to cover the expenses of the departments, then that means we have to look at those departments and cut positions in order to balance the budget. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Let's talk about, just real quick, is there going to be an effect, like a domino effect, if we change, like if we adjust, like some are suggesting? What would be the effect, the end game?
Your budget that is now in balance would then be out of balance and would have to, either expenses would need to be cut or revenues would need to be added in order to get the budget back into balance.
Other questions and comments? Councilman Savage.
So there's a couple things, since we're talking about water, we're not actually there, but it is part of it. 8% increase, is that what we're talking about?
Yes, for infrastructure, yes.
And yes, and that needs to be said, or at least considered, whether agreed or not agreed on. We had set a, I think of the correct word, but we'd set a policy on how to get our water mains or water lines replaced, et cetera, and we set how to step that in. even though we're not getting a water increase, it's something we need to know why that increase is there, which that's part of it, whether we decide to do it or not. We need to know that a little bit. I just want to mention that a little bit to decide how far out, and we had some discussion about it, how far out it'll take us to get these lines replaced. Also, talking about cutting staff. Also, we could be talking about not adding staff. There are various other ways that needs to be thrown into the mix. It's not all just about cut. It's not all just about not increasing wages, various things. There's several pieces that needs to all come into play. And we need to understand that if in putting this budget together. It's not a do or die budget here yet. So, one thing we could do is decide to stretch, if we decided to do it that way, we could stretch our water line replacement out. May not be a good thing, but we need to know if we do, how far, what that's gonna, how that's gonna land. And I think the citizens would need to know that. It needs to be very clear. What kind of positions would we talk about that we're not adding, and what's the dollar figures involved in it? So I think all of that needs to be explained and brought out on the table in numbers.
I
There are a lot,
apologize.
there are a lot of pieces to that, but the simple answer is if you reduce revenues, then you either have to increase revenues someplace else or cut the expenses that are in the proposed budget.
And that's
It doesn't
exactly,
necessarily have to be salaries, correct?
and that's exactly right, but we need to know, decide if we want to do some of these options,
Yes.
how it's going to affect and where it's going to affect. Obviously, it's service. Is that service completely needed, necessary to sustain? Not making an argument whether it is or whether it isn't, but those are the things that we have to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And water mains is one of the things that is huge. And we made some tough decisions early on and set steps in how we were going to do that. Everyone needs to weigh that out, including the public.
And we will go into more detail with those when we go through the proprietary funds, if that's okay.
It's absolutely okay, but I'm kind of preparing you for, if we're going to go a different direction, exactly everywhere is it going to affect?
Mm-hmm.
And what's our options in what it affects and how it can affect? Then we might be able to make a better informed decision. It's all in here, but it probably ought to be brought out a little bit more.
Well, I was going to apologize that since we brought that up with the proprietary, how many water main breaks have we had? And it's getting cold. And anticipation, that was on my mayor's communication, and it was a great segue.
Are you talking about water main breaks? We've had 0 this month.
This month. All right. How many breaks have we had, though?
This month or when?
Forever.
In the last year.
Last year we've had 31.
And what do you anticipate now? I'm not trying to get you to be a prophet. With the temperatures going down, how is that going to work?
Normally we'd have breaks when it goes down this dramatically. I'm kind of surprised we haven't had any.
Oh,
Probably tonight we're going to have a bunch.
I've heard from several citizens that have had their personal water lines break or froze up, and
When the
maybe by the
temperatures,
time. Go ahead.
when the temperatures go back up, hopefully next week, I would look for us to be fixing a lot of breaks.
Wow. Yes, sir.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because that's got to be considered in how we decide what's the best way to spend the money. So one way would be is get us some information on how much we've spent and what kind of an area is it, the areas that we're going to be replacing. Things like that is what I would like to know, not just in water. I'm probably going to ask that question in several of the areas. What's it going to cost us on the other side? And that will help us to weigh out if this is a good budget all the way through. I think it would. That directly affects the replacement of the water mains, which does in fact go direct to this increase that we're talking about right now. Can that be done?
And you say we're gonna do the
Pretty quiet in
proprietary?
here.
I'll answer any more questions about overhead allocation, and I'd also like to know if council would like to see a budget amendment next week for the 3-year true-up, 2018, 19, and 20. And would that just be for the water fund that over-transferred to the general fund, or would you like to see also a budget amendment of some sort for the funds that under-transferred?
Oh, yes, Councilwoman Davidson.
I'll answer you. Me personally, I'd like to see the water fund transfer. What was that number, like 3 something?
It's 237.94 for, that's the total for the 3 years, $230,794.
Yeah, I would like to see that transferred back.
No, we're not getting an emotion right now. But you're just getting a discussion? Is this what we're doing?
This would be direction to staff to prepare the document for the next meeting.
Okay.
So if there's a general consensus,
Well, if anyone has another idea, I could
Yeah,
always
exactly.
prepare a different agenda item, but for, like, that's what I'm gonna go with for right now. And then you guys can all vote on it at the next meeting.
Rocking and rolling. Councilwoman Van Winkle, you've been gone a while. Okay.
Can't see me behind the mask. And I agree with you, it ought to be transferred back, but from where? I mean, where's it coming from?
Based on that direction, I was going to take it from the general fund.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify, and I wasn't sure where we
Good
were
point.
taking it from, but that's fine.
Anybody,
That's what I would have suggested as well.
are we all right with that? It's just discussion, that coming up?
Okay, then, I think we're ready to talk about the budget. And I'm just gonna, I'm interested to see how long I talk tonight. And so I'm gonna start my clock at 7:28 PM to talk about the budget. Okay, let's see here. So we're gonna start with the Gulf Fund. Again, I tried to just copy and do 2 columns for less confusion. I'm only planning on talking about changes from prior years. If it has to do with inflation, I'm not planning on mentioning it. And I just want to go ahead and start off with the fact that I'm not planning on talking about the Street Impact Fee Fund, the Mayor's Christmas Tree Fund, the Drug Seizure Fund, the DWI Fund, the Special Training Fund, or the Solid Waste Fund tonight. And the reason for that is because we're not changing anything from prior years. If there's any amounts that are changing, it's just based on, there's not any new programs, there are no new purchases, just cost fluctuations, okay? I still would recommend that you guys all look at those, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and we can talk about it at the next meeting. So in the Gulf Fund, there are really no changes, except for in other revenue. We are planning on, other revenue is the lease purchase proceeds for new equipment. In the current fiscal year, council had budgeted to purchase $282,800 of equipment by lease purchase, and the proposed budget includes $55,000 of equipment purchased by lease purchase. In the salary and wages area, there's a 1-step increase for all eligible employees budgeted on their anniversary date, and then the increased estimated cost of loggers and workers' comp, that totals about $28,000. There are also 3 position grade changes, 2 managers and 1 superintendent at a cost of about $9,000. And then there's 1 new position, a Gulf maintenance worker, that has been added into the budget. And there are no other changes in the operating expenses for the golf fund. And if we look at golf capital outlay, for next year's budget, we have a tractor with front loader attachment at a cost of $55,000. That is planned to be purchased with lease proceeds. So we would be borrowing money for that and making payments. And then also purchasing, using cash, a used heavy-duty utility vehicle at the cost of $15,000. Any questions about the golf?
Councilman Clark.
Maybe Jay can answer it, but I noticed that the golf course netting is not being transferred over, and that is an insurance adjustment from about 4 years ago, and just don't know, I don't think it's gonna be done before April 1, so.
If it is not, then what will happen is at our cash carryover true-up, the very first budget amendment of the next year, that will be carried over.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Lathrop.
I have a question. We had 3 positions in the golf fund that jumped from 32 to a 37.
Yes. Based on the salary study, that was the recommendation to have us with market.
So
And yes.
That's more than 5% or 2.5%.
So we are only increasing if, the only time that those positions are getting increased is if the person would not be on the new scale. So basically, for example, let's say you have somebody that is a 35-6 on the scale, and they're recommended to go up 3 steps. So they would be placed at 38-3. So they would be brought down to a lower step on their new scale. The only exceptions to that is if their current pay rate is not a step on the new scale. And that is the case for at least one of these positions. That's why there is a cost of $9,000 related to that. I think it was more than one. I think it was 2. I'm sorry, I don't remember because I did this on Friday night.
3 on the golf.
Three positions, but I don't think that they're all going to change salaries. I think only 1 or 2 of them is changing salaries.
I didn't know about the salary. It's just that they jumped from 32 to 37.
Yes.
That's a 5-step
Yes,
increase.
it has been many years since those positions have changed grades, and so in order to get them up to market, it was several steps, several grade changes.
But you're still saying it's going to stay at 2.5%.
It's the cost of those position grade changes for the golf course is $9,000. So there are employees that need to be increased because they would not be on the new scale if we didn't give them a bump. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that make sense, Councilman Lathrop?
No.
Jay was next.
Not when we started at 2.5% and then this goes up. I know you can be in that same category, a couple up and be down, but, you know, a 5-step jump is got to increase by quite a bit.
Councilman Lathrop, if I could fill you in. Part of that is because, once again, most of our positions were relatively low-paying positions to begin with. Well, the floor has been raised. Minimum wage keeps coming up. Those aren't matching the increases in minimum wage. So that's why you're seeing the steps going up, not percentage per se, but that's why you're seeing the jump in the steps to meet the salary schedule that has been recommended, if you understand what I'm saying. So, you know, it was $7.65 for minimum wage 4 years ago. It's now $10.60. So, you know, those 2.5% increases aren't the same. It's 45 cents in some of the cases for for my staff to get a 2.5% increase, where minimum wage is going up 85 cents a year. So do you recognize what I'm saying there?
Yeah, everything else is either staying the same or making one jump for the most part.
Yeah, it's, once again, it's more of a classification change, not necessarily a, you know, a 20% increase in their salary per se. It's just where they're classified on the scale going up or down, you know, for that particular grade.
Yeah. And that's that, but we also had some units that went down in personnel that dropped one group. Now, how can you drop and get an increase?
Well, our temporary salaries would have ended up being more because of minimum wage, but we were able to reduce the temporary salaries because we're adding a new full-time golf maintenance worker position.
No, I wasn't worried about, not talking about the golf course now.
Oh.
Other departments, instead of going up, they went down one notch.
Okay. When that happens, it's because we actually are budgeting for the actual person that is working there now. So in certain cases, you would have had a long-term employee retire or leave employment with the city and have been replaced with a person that is now making less money because they have less experience, if that makes sense.
Well, yes, it does. But we had 5 of them in the same department.
Which department are we talking about?
Fire department.
In the fire department?
Mm-hmm. We had a fire captain, went from 55 to 53. Fire apparatus operator from, I can't read my own writing.
And you're saying that their salaries went down overall?
I'm not saying their salaries went down. I'm saying they went from this 44 step down to a 43, or a 39 down to a 38.
Okay, so in your guys' budget document, there are 3 columns. There's the column that shows what the people are making currently this year. There's a column for the proposed grade, and then there is a column for the requested grade, and then the proposed grade. For all of the positions that are in contract negotiations right now, because we have not determined, we've set aside the money, but we haven't determined what the final proposed negotiated grade is going to be. We left them, you should look at the requested grade for what fair market value is, based on that salary survey, instead of looking at the proposed grade. Does that make sense to everyone? And it's because those positions are under negotiation right now, and we couldn't propose. It didn't make sense to propose the department request when we don't know what's going to actually be proposed. But we did reflect what the amount should be, and it's in the requested column.
So,
and you'll see that in 2 departments, and it's fire and police. Both are currently under contract negotiations.
yeah, but I don't know the salary. We don't have the salary of each person. I'm looking at this going up or down 1 notch or 2 notches.
Yes.
And that's why I say one department's going down 4 or 5 people 1 notch, and another one is going up a couple, 3 notches. You know.
No.
It don't tell me how much money we're making difference. I know it's good, and I'm just worrying about that.
We probably should ask these questions ahead of time. If we all council people have these kinds of questions, we can get those done ahead of time, so I'd recommend that. Jay, back to the golf course real quick. Couldn't we just make our golf course where everybody has to walk? You know, I like to walk and so Councilman Clark won't have his carriage to take him around and play golf? What do you think?
No, I think it would be detrimental to make it walking only, but we do have a number of people walking, so we've got both available for you.
Oh, I would never, how many miles is it around there?
Oh, it's roughly about 7 miles total.
No.
I'll walk as long as you carry my clubs.
Oh, golly.
Am I
Only
next on the
take a,
floor?
what, 9-iron?
Huh?
9-iron and putter?
Yeah, yeah. I only use 3 anyhow, so. Am I next on the floor?
If you want.
Sheila said that we're adding an employee in the golf department. It doesn't show that here.
Yeah, when I told Alexa, I don't think it's in her budget letter either. When I was going through on Friday night and comparing all the differences, I forgot to make the change on the back of the golf maintenance worker. And one other change, we have a part-time secretary in water, and that position, we're going to talk about it when we get to the water, is going to go to full-time.
Well, my
So-
question was getting into not about that, but it probably explains answers my question. As I noticed, some departments were taking a huge increase in health insurance costs, and some departments weren't taking hardly anything. I mean, he was going up $14,000, and I'm like, well, how does five guys go up $14,000?
Yeah, it's one new full-time employee.
Okay, because it doesn't jive with what our budget says.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's a good catch.
There-
Councilwoman Davidson, go ahead.
Oh, no, I mean, go ahead and explain.
Well, I also want to just warn everyone, I had highlighted tabs in the budget document before to print. I didn't unhighlight the tabs and made some changes, so there are there are rows that are actually hidden in your guys' budget document. Unintentionally, I have to go through and unhide every single column and then hide the ones that are like zeroed out now, because I have found in several instances, the park told me, I know the amount's in there, but it doesn't foot, so something's hidden. And so I apologize, I'm gonna have to go through and unhide all of the columns and go through page by page before we reprint the final budget. No numbers will change and the totals won't change, but there are hidden columns because I made changes while tabs were highlighted. I was trying to save paper. I will never try to save paper again.
Councilman Clark, go ahead.
Just one question. How many more years do we have on that? Is it a bond that we have the course, the land on? How many more years we have left on that?
I think we have 6.
6? Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Davidson?
So the one new position, golf maintenance worker, what is that, $65,000?
Yes.
Does that include the benefits?
Yes.
And I don't want to offend anybody. I'm not a golfer. I don't know what it takes to run a golf course. But why the new position?
Well, the biggest reason is the workforce that's out in the marketplace right now. So, realistically, as minimum wage keeps rising, the marketplace to find part-time labor is shrinking. It's very thin right now. So you can't walk into a business that isn't have job openings at this particular moment. And even though minimum wage is increasing, if you look at Kansas City as a whole right now, $12 an hour is pretty much starting wage anywhere you go. Once again, it was $7.65 just a few years ago. So that increase has narrowed the gap where, for example, a few years ago, we only had a few people that made more than $10 an hour. So now that entire range of what we pay people to get people to come to work has had to be increased across the board. So it's not just the minimum wage folks, it's also everybody else that gets reflected in there because, once again, like I said, a $13 an hour position at a 2.5% increase is 35 cents. Well, minimum wage is going up 85 cents a year. So it's not fair to the person that's doing the job that you've already spent the time and energy to train. So that's really what we're looking at is, one, we have a tremendous amount of turnover. So it's a lot of time and energy training folks where the gap has narrowed so much. That salary, even though it says it's a $65,000 position, obviously there's a lot of benefits included into that. But I believe it's around a $17 an hour job. So it's, it's still, in my opinion, a fairly lower or beginning salary for a full-time worker. But once again, we're just looking for labor with the time constraints that we have. We can't work anybody more than 29 and a half hours. All those things, there just aren't people out there that want to work multiple jobs and give you the effort that you need to be able to maintain. I mean, in some cases, we're having people driving $70,000 pieces of equipment out there on the golf course. We don't really want just any labor using that piece of equipment on the golf course.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Next, what we got?
Okay, I'd like to talk about the wastewater fund next. One of the things that you don't necessarily see, well, you don't see it in your budget book. This is a calculation that I do every year to make sure that that we're generating money to be able to go towards our capital outlay expenses with the proprietary funds. And so you can see that our sewer fees do not anticipate a rate increase at all. There's not going to be a rate increase from Little Blue, and so 0 rate increases proposed for the sewer charges. You can see that our current year revenues are $6.4 million, and our operating expenses are $5.9 million, which is generating about $483,000 more in revenues than in operating expenses. That money is being used and going towards capital outlay, and we're putting that back towards our infrastructure and maintaining that infrastructure. There is an amount of money when the voters approved the sewer bonds. We started collecting the debt service charge. We are actually restricting that to only be used for the debt service. We have about $2.7 million in the fund that we have collected towards that debt service charge, but haven't paid that out in principal and interest payments yet. Our total outstanding debt is $15.6 million. We also have other capital carryover. So the city instituted equipment replacement funds, a meter equipment replacement fund, a vehicle equipment replacement fund, and I think it's a pump equipment replacement fund in the proprietary funds and also in the street fund. And the reason for doing this in these proprietary funds was to level off rate increases. So the equipment and the pumps that the city has to expend to maintain those items and to purchase new can be very pricey. And so trying to level out the rate increases, the city has been putting money aside to save up for those purchases, so we don't have to do a big rate increase in a year that some equipment needs to be replaced. We also have $1 million from a project that was done with bond money, and the fund went over budget that year. And so basically this money is being restricted to go towards this debt. And then we have non-allocated. So this would be $1.7 million of excess revenues over expenditures from previous years that haven't been spent yet that we can use for capital items in the sewer fund. You can see that the total amount of money that we have available for capital is that $1.7 million plus the $483,000 from current year revenues. And our total capital outlay for this year that is proposed in the budget is $5.2 million. $3.7 million of that is carried over from prior years. And so our current year proposed capital outlay, that to make sure that we're balancing and we're not going to go into negative arrears, you can see that we have plenty of money of capital available for this to meet these $1.5 million of requirements. Does anybody have questions about that? Okay, if not, we do have a one-step 2.5% increase that totals about $31,000 in salary and benefits in the wastewater fund. We have plant maintenance. When I was going through the budget on Friday night, I was looking at this, and I really think that this plant maintenance needs to be moved to capital outlay. And so if nobody objects, I'm planning on doing that before you adopt the final budget. We have an increase in the public works billing. That is because there was an increase. We had hired a new position in the public works department. When we were talking about the overhead allocation, I don't know if you remember, I explained that the entire public works department that is located in the general fund goes 100% to serve the water, wastewater, and street funds. And this is the amount that the wastewater fund pays for their share of engineering costs. And then in building supplies, this year they added $100,000 for their new building maintenance. I believe that also should be moved to capital outlay. So unless somebody has an objection, I'm planning on moving that to capital outlay. Again, the total budgeted amounts will not change. It's just going to come out of building supplies and go into capital outlay. I think it's a better reflection of what that is. And other than that, there are not any changes to the wastewater fund. I'd like to go ahead and talk about capital outlay before I answer questions about the fund. We have $150,000 that is being carried over from last year for the Public Works Operations Building. We have stream bank stabilization, public I&I, that's going to be focused in the West Belton area. $130,000 towards the Sunrise Gardens lift station replacement. $150,000 for a regional wastewater treatment plant study. And $20,000 for security gates. And then we have $750,000 that we're saving towards pump equipment replacement. $40,000 for half of a Bobcat. The water fund will be paying the other half of that. $5,500 for half of a heavy duty trailer. Again, the water fund will be paying the other half. A tap cutter, meter equipment replacement in the amount of $509,400. An emergency generator. This is actually not enough to purchase that generator, and they're just adding a little bit of money to that amount each year, carrying it over until they accumulate enough money to buy that emergency generator. We are actually doing water meter register replacements, and this is a partial cost. The water fund pays the other chunk of money. And then we have vehicle equipment replacement funds of totaling $830,000, and we're purchasing an F-350 pickup, snow plow, and salt spreader in both the water and the wastewater fund, and the wastewater fund is paying half, and the water fund will be paying the other half. So the total capital outlay is about $5.3 million. Are there any questions about the wastewater fund?
Councilwoman Davidson?
Can you scroll up a little bit? Can somebody talk about the public I&I program and what that entails?
Public I&I is where stormwater enters into our sanitary sewer system. So our sanitary sewer system works very well day to day. When it rains, water from rainwater gets into our sanitary sewer system, and it increases our cost for processing that water. But the second thing, it also costs us backups into people's homes because there's too much water, and so it's got to come out somewhere, so it comes out people's basements. So what the Public I&I program does is we identify places where we can limit the amount of water coming into our sanitary sewer system. The first place where we look is manholes. And in the manholes, there are different pieces that put together and water leaks through them. So we put an epoxy seal on them, seals them up so water can't get in. The second place we look is where plumbers make the connection from the house to the sanitary sewer. Back in the day, plumbers would go to the clay pipe, they'd take a hammer and just beat on it until the hole was bigger than the pipe they want to stick in. They'd stick the pipe in and just bury it. And so when it rains, lots of stormwater finds its way into those pipes. So we actually have to dig down and fix all those Ys. And sometimes we take the service line then all the way back to the right-of-way line, so we know on our portion there's nothing that needs to be fixed on the right-of-way again. So those are the two main things we're doing right now to prevent I&I.
And then, thank you. And can you scroll down a little bit? Now I'm trying to remember what my questions were. Okay, so the line 75, the meter equipment replacement, and line 91, the water meter register replacement. Is that a program that we just internally run and maintain, and we've decided that we're going to replace a certain number each year? How does that work?
It is time to replace our registers. So the transmitters are running out of battery, and so sometimes the transmitters aren't transmitting. And how that affects us is that means that somebody, I don't even know if you guys know, I think all of you know, but we have radio read transmitters, and that's how how our water meters are read. If a battery is dead, then we get a 0 read. And so we have to send back the guys out to actually take a physical read of the meter. And it's just that the batteries, they actually have lasted longer than they were promised to last. But each cycle, they were put in over a few years, and now each cycle is dying. And so there's new technology. The new technology is actually amazing. It actually takes hourly readings. So if somebody calls because they have a high consumption and they don't know what happened, we can actually go plug in the reader to their meter and get all their hourly reads for like the last 30 days. And so then you can see, it helps you tell, like, is it a toilet that's running because they're using water like overnight, or, periodically through the day, or did somebody leave the hose on one time? And you can see that, maybe somebody forgot to turn off the hose because they used a ton of water this 2-day period. And so it's actually technology is amazing, and the technology is better in these new meters. And when we finally get the entire city replaced, I think it's going to be great.
So is that the register replacement, or is that the equipment replacement?
This is this meter equipment replacement. This is kind of like the savings account, and we are taking money out of this account to pay for this next year's purchases.
The batteries.
It's not the batteries, it's actually the entire transmitter gets replaced.
Okay.
Not the meter, it's the body of the meter itself, but the transmitter.
And then my last question, sorry. Line 116, the F-350 pickup, snowplow, and spreader. Why would this be in this account and shared with water?
It's the supervisor over both water and sewer.
Okay. Thank you.
Along those lines, real quick, a couple of them there that were interesting. The first one, the I&I, with being on the Little Blue Sewer, which I got a marathon tomorrow. Our rates went up incredibly because of I&I. Now, why would that happen? And they were treating water because our infrastructure's old, and they came to the conclusion that, go ahead.
Well, it's just there's a certain amount of sewage that we have every single day. And then as it rains, we have amount of water that's infiltrated. Now, since we're in a drought for 3 months, you see the rates, we don't have as much water go down there. Come spring, you see a tremendous amount of water goes down to the treatment plant. Whether it's just pure water or whether it's sewage, it gets all treated. So we pay for that stormwater.
So they did a study and found out that we had so much I&I, they increased our rate somewhat.
They just adjusted the formulas on how it was calculated to make sure it closely matched what the meter readings were.
Okay. So that was a surprise, but how are we going to replace that infrastructure?
Right now, we're just making repairs to the current infrastructure.
Okay. All right, what do we got next?
The water fund. So the water fund, okay. I actually want to talk about the rate increase first, if we could. Budgeted in the proposed budget is the 8% infrastructure rate increase to water rates. It would increase the minimum bill by $1.23 a month. It would increase each additional 100 gallons by about 9 cents. And you can see that the overall minimum water and sewer bill would increase by about 2.62% if it was a minimum bill. And then you can see that for somebody that uses 6,000 gallons a month, their overall water and sewer bill would increase about 3.15% with an 8% rate increase. The 8% rate increase is anticipated to generate an additional $464,000 in revenues. That's what we hope will happen. The 10% rate increase in fiscal year 2021, we had anticipated an additional $483,600 of revenue. We only actually generated about $390,000, and that is an estimate actually because the year isn't over, but I'm thinking that it's going to end up being about $390,000. A part of that is because of the deferral of the rate increase. I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning of the pandemic, we deferred the rate increase. The goal at the end of fiscal year 25 is to generate about be generating an additional $1.7 million a year to replace pipes and infrastructure that's in the ground. And that $1.7 million a year would replace approximately 1.5 miles of pipe each year. The city has 25.78 miles of pipe that needs to be replaced in total. That is cast iron and asbestos. That has met its end of life and is exceeding. And that total cost of replacement is a little over $27 million in today's dollars. So if we...
Pardon me?
If we were able to generate the $1.7 million a year for pipe replacement, it will be about a little over 17 years before all the pipe is able to be replaced. Any questions about that? And we can always come back to it, but I think Councilman Savage might have a question.
Are you okay?
I'm good. Do you want to ask?
You got a question?
Yes, at least a year ago, we was looking at possibly some help on this asbestos. Is that moving anywhere?
Yes, we've actually been meeting with the former Grandview Public Works Director, who is a liaison to the EPA, and is hoping to help us walk through that process. Applications are submitted, deadline is September, October timeframe. So we are working through that process. He believes that there's more assessment that we need to do in the beginning versus just going straight for that grant in order to be able to prove it. So we're quite a few years out before we'd see that come to fruition, but that is our goal. We're still trying to get grant money for that project area, and that was about 3.5 miles.
Thank you. And yes, let's just keep moving forward on that. We should
Oh,
be able to
absolutely.
make that happen.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I would like to flip back to this page. So this page, I just want to show you guys this. So our current year revenues, budgeted revenues for fiscal year 22, that are not restricted, so not for debt service, is $6.6 million almost. Our current year operating expenses is $5.7 million, which gives us $821,000 more of revenues than expenses in the current in fiscal year 22. And you can see that the cash carryover detail has $4.3 million of debt service charge with outstanding debt of $7.4 million. There's $1 million for equipment replacement, $600,000 for capital items that are being carried over from the prior year, and there's almost $1.3 million of non-allocated. That's not allocated. It's not restricted. It's available to be used for capital items. And then you can see that the $821,000 plus that $1.3 million gives us about $2.1 million that's available for capital this year. And in the budget, we have about $1.1 million of that, of proposed capital outlay. Again, there is an 8% rate increase that is in the proposed budget. There is also a one-step 2.5% increase for all eligible employees on their anniversary date, and the increased cost of benefits. That cost is about $9,000, and we're changing the part-time secretary to full-time. It took me a long time, like I was looking at this for a long time on Friday night, wondering why this amount is so much less. And I feel like it's because we had the custodian in last year's budget and we eliminated that position. And so I think that skewed it a little bit. And then we have, we did increase the amount for water line maintenance for the aging infrastructure and breaks that we're anticipating will happen. That's a change from last year. We increased that by added about $60,000 more. Our building maintenance, again, I really want to move this to capital outlay. I'm sorry I didn't catch it before going through the budget presentation. There's $100,000 in there that I think more reflects capital outlay than an operating expense. We do have an increase for the public works engineering position that got added, so that increased their share of their public works billing. And other than that, there weren't any changes in in operating expenses. And the capital outlay that is budgeted, you can see $150,000 for the Public Works building that's being carried over, $750,000 for water replacement, line replacement, $100,000 for the water master plan. Again, we have a money set aside in savings for the meter equipment replacement and the pump equipment replacement. And then the other half of those items that were budgeted in the sewer fund. And then we also have money set aside for a vehicle equipment allocation. Are there any questions about this water fund budget?
Councilman Van Winkle.
Yeah, one of your very first slides, you were showing that we had an 800,000 surplus, but we didn't discuss where that came from.
This $800,000 is the amount of money that is being generated from current year revenues to go towards water line replacement, to replace that aging infrastructure. And that is with the rate increase, the 8% rate increase that's being proposed.
The proposed or, okay. So that's, you're saying you're expecting that kind of excess based on that proposed?
Yes, and we would, yes.
You know what, we're talking about 1.7 million?
We need the plan that was proposed to council last year for you to consider each year. Whether or not you would continue is, our goal was to get up to $1.7 million by the end of 5 years to go towards those water lines every year so that we could get them replaced. So we have
This 800 surplus above that 1.7?
I'm sorry.
This 800 surplus above that 1.7 million?
No, this is, eventually our hope is that this $800,000 grows to $1.7 million so that we can use that towards capital each year.
Okay, thanks.
Councilwoman Davidson.
Here, I'll start by turning my microphone on. Yeah, so this, really, it's a budget based on an 8% increase. So the 1.7 million that the city would like to see that grow to, is that representative of an amount that we could actually spend per year? Like, we have enough time in a year to actually spend that money each year?
That would be contracted out, yes. That would be very easy to spend in 1 year.
The other part is, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the things that we're having to do right now is because it's a minimal amount and the cost to do any type of work like this is so large that we're having to right now accumulate dollars that we have in order to be able to do a project area.
Yeah, there's so much work to be done that I almost think, well, my own feeling is that you almost need a more significant amount of money to really make any impact, similar to the bonds that we've done for our roads and stormwater at this point in 2018. Anyway, I think that's all I have. There was a tab that you showed, I think it was like the second to the last one that you covered.
This one?
Can you scroll down a little bit?
Let me make this a little bit bigger.
And so the position that we went from part-time to full-time, can you just kind of talk about why why we made that decision?
We have a person that is filling that position right now on a part-time basis. She is a long-term employee who decided to, a few years ago, go to only part-time, and she is looking at retiring, and so we will need to fill that position, and it will be somebody that's new, and it will take them full-time to do what our long-term employee is doing part-time.
Can you go to the next tab? Can you go to the capital outlay tab? Thank you. And so right now, I'm kind of trying to tie this back into the allocation that we talked to at the very beginning. So water is the biggest contributor to the overhead allocation because it has the highest revenue. I understand that. So when we raised the rate, 5% last year initially, the first step?
Yes. We capped, it did not affect the amount that was being transferred for the overhead allocation because it's capped.
Okay. So that was another question I had. And then the water line replacement that we have up there, line 13, $750,000 set aside, Hargis Lake. So is that part of the Prop S, or I'm sorry, Prop Stormwater?
Yes, go ahead, Greg.
So the project that's in the stormwater bond fund, just like an electric line or utility lines that are out there, the water department's an enterprise water department. So as we move the sewer line has to go exactly where the water line's at. It has to be there first because it's a gravity feed. The water's pressurized so we can move the water in different angles to get around it. So the water line has to be moved. So that falls not onto the stormwater bonds, that falls back on the utility company, which is our water department. So the water department has to replace those lines or move the lines so they actually get replaced at the same time. And that's going to cost about $750,000.
Thank you.
And there is, Councilman Savage asked this question, so I just want to point it out. He and I spoke last night, and we could have those stormwater bonds pay for that if the city council so chose, but you would have less money for those other stormwater projects.
Do we have an idea of how $750,000 less would impact the project plan?
Are you talking for overall?
Yeah.
So overall, we have 8 different projects that are scheduled. The 8 projects were totaling actually more than what the initial bond issuance was. I guess in 2 ways. One, in hopes of the bid prices coming in lower, or second, they just roll over to a second bond issue in a later date. And so we'd actually have to eliminate one of the projects that are on the list today.
Any other questions or comments? Sir?
Restate what I stated last night as we were talking. I still believe that this stormwater is forcing that water line to be moved. It's part of that project. I feel that it is. I understand what the impact is on the other side, but we've got to deal with that later. I still think that to get that stormwater run, you got to move this. That's part of the stormwater project. Should not be funded out of the water. That's how I feel about it. Thank you.
Councilman Van Winkle?
And I concur with Councilman Savage on that as well.
Okay. Councilwoman?
So I'll just tack on to that. And, if you look at that $750,000, if that money doesn't have to come out of here, then we could look at not doing the step 2 rate increase this year and be more than covered with what we would have generated with that 8%.
comments? Okay, which was first? Councilman Savage, go ahead.
Well, and I'm open to talk about that as well. I certainly am open to talk about it. However, we got to know that the stormwater would get changed accordingly somewhere down the line, and we still have water line that we need to continue to build in order to do projects with. So we got to be. It's going to cost us either way we run, whichever way we move. I'm not saying I agree or disagree on what we should do on it. I'm just saying we got to weigh out both sides of what's going to cost. If we don't do the increase on the water, which I'd like to not do that, but I also am looking way on down the line of how we're going to get these water lines replaced as well. And I think we're probably adding. I think my point of the stormwater paying for that is to generate that dollars to still replace water lines. I think I'd be going that direction, at least at this point.
Councilman Trutzel.
Greg, you said that if you take that money and use it for what we're talking about, then one of the stormwater projects would have to be eliminated or cut back, right? Is that what you said?
That's correct.
So you'd have to pick and choose your venom as to what do you want to do. I mean, it's either going to be this or that, and neither one of them is a good choice. So I'm not sure exactly. I understand what everybody's saying, but if we're trying to do stormwater is what it is. If we're trying to do water replacement, and I agree with, we have a lot of water lines to replace, but I'm not sure it's taking money from one to do the other is a good idea.
Councilman Finn, you're up.
I'm all about saving money, but more interested in more revenue. So, I mean, that's the opportunity there. One of the things I was thinking about, as far as what we have as growth going on in our community and having more water meters essentially coming in, what does that look like over the next 3 years into our city for the opportunity to get to that 1.7 you guys are looking for? Instead of cutting projects, which we know need to be done anyway, absolutely, how do we look at continue to grow and increase that revenue instead of having to tax even more for the water services? Just add on to it with the amount of properties we have.
And we absolutely will be looking at that each year as we bring recommendations and a proposed budget to the council so that the council has that information to be able to see where we're at and how we're doing.
Absolutely.
Next, anyone? Yes?
Any more questions about the water fund? Okay. Park. I know those people back in there have been waiting for this for a long time. And hopefully now that we're moving to the special revenue funds, will be faster. So this is just the park summary, and I tried to summarize all the changes. Property taxes, because of an increase in personal property in the city, are anticipated to grow about $46,000 in fiscal year 22. The park sales tax fund is going to transfer an additional $144,000 to the park operating fund in fiscal year 22. There is a small increase in aquatic center revenue because the swim team is going to start having monthly swim meets, which will generate about an additional $5,000. In the recreation fund, the summer camp, there's a rate increase associated with that, and that is really to cover the minimum wage increase. It didn't cover all of it, but it's to try to cover some of those additional costs due to that minimum wage increase. Also, the park is going to be adding adult softball leagues, and they are basically they moved to better reflect where the revenue is coming from. Facility rentals have been moved to their appropriate department, and so you'll see that special events revenue decreased a little bit, but that money isn't actually decreasing, it's just moving to its appropriate department. The High Blue Wellness Center, let's see. Oh, and there was a facility, there's going to be doing rental fees for tournaments, an increase of $5 per game per field, which will generate about an additional $15,000. In the High Blue Wellness Center, passes are actually just trending down by about $288,000. It's not a change in things that they're doing, but it's a change in the post-pandemic environment right now. And since it's so significant, I wanted to mention it. And then, again, facility rental revenue moved from special events to High Blue Wellness Center.
Councilman Clark?
Because of the pandemic, is that something they could get money for, like in the CARES Act or anything to help offset that, or is that?
The CARES Act doesn't replace revenue, but they are able to get some of their expenses that weren't included in their budget last year reimbursed.
Other questions? Councilman Trutzel?
I'm just curious, is to the swim team, I guess that's a outside swim team, it's not, okay, yeah. Thank you.
And those are their revenues. And then for expenditures, they also have a one-step increase for all eligible employees. I'm sorry, I copied and pasted. It's not actually on their anniversary date. They're just pushing everybody to mid-year to see if their revenues are doing okay before they do that. They are also adding a part-time concessions manager and a part-time employee. And they have an increase of their part-time employee minimum wage in the maintenance department. That totaled about $11,500. They eliminated a full-time rec supervisor and a front desk coordinator position, which reduced their salary and benefits by about $75,000. And then they are moving their swim lesson personnel to be paid by the pool management company. So money is reducing in part-time wages and increasing in contractual. Other than salary changes, they have an increase in the maintenance department for building and grounds maintenance. They're planning on purchasing an HVAC system and doing some playground repair for about an addition of $6,000. They're also planning on doing a new vehicle lease. In their outdoor water park, which is the outdoor water park, it's a contractual minimum wage increase is going to cost them additional $7,700. And they are also showing a reduction in chemicals because they're planning to switch to liquid chlorine, which is a cost savings. At High Blue Wellness Center, they have a reduction in utility cost, and that is due to changing out their light bulbs to LED lights and also getting Evergy rebates. And they are also kind of basing that on what's actually trended this year. And then in the aquatics, the indoor pool contractual is going up $14,000. That's because of that minimum wage increase. And then they are also benefiting from switching to liquid chlorine in their supply line, which will save about $10,000.
Yes, ma'am.
I assume the reduction in positions is fully, if not in part, due to COVID. Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Okay.
Okay, next is the hotel motel tax. Whoops, I was gonna make it bigger and instead I moved it over. The only change is, unfortunately, due to COVID, we have budgeted a less $97,000 reduction in revenues. and that's just based on how it's trending right now. And there are no other changes. The 2.5% increase in salaries, but you can't see it here because we budgeted for an employee and ended up hiring at a lesser rate than we were kind of doing for somebody with more experience, and we got a great person at a lesser rate.
Councilman Finn, you had a question?
I did. It tied back into the parks too, just a little bit. Kind of direct toward Brian on this. What percentage of our tournaments got canceled last year? I know we got hit a little bit there in the season and weren't able to carry out a lot of our tournaments. Could you just give me a ballpark on a percentage we did not get to last year?
Probably about 20 to 25%. They actually filled in a lot of weekends in July and August that they normally do not play.
Okay, and I'm looking at that for a direct reflection of kind of what's happening here on this conversation that we're having now, as those increase back this year.
Yeah, I was
Hopefully.
actually going to comment. So Midwest Sports Productions is a company that we contract that comes in and rents our marquee park to put on these tournaments. They've kind of had a change in organization, and they have a new name. It's called the Perfect Game Midwest, which is going to allow them to be honestly a lot bigger and bring a lot more widespread teams into Belton. We will be seeing more tournaments. So right now, I've got the spring and the summer schedule, and we've got 19 on the books from middle of March to mid-July. And I just want to let you all know that we're going to host 3 Top Gun tournaments. And for those of you who don't know, Top Gun is some of the highest level softball that you'll find in the country. July 12th to the 17th, we're hosting the Top Gun Regional Championships. And then the following week, it's a 5-day tournament. We've been chosen to host a World Series tournament. And so for our community, this is a huge deal, and obviously we're gonna be working with the Perfect Game and some of our partners. You know, we probably our chamber, because this is a big economic driver. Marquee Park is going to drive those 2 weeks. We're going to see teams from all over the country coming to Belton. And I know the mayor has commented several times about any given weekend you can go through Parkey and see 3, 4, 5 different license plates from different states. This World Series, you may see 12 to 15.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the sidebar on that, because honestly, that ties directly into what we're looking at right here with what's going to be coming into our city, and we're going to see these revenues increase as your tournaments do. So thank you for everything that you guys are doing over there to help bring in people from all over the region.
Brian, we've talked before about the economic impact of having these tournaments, and I've seen estimates that we've had out of the park before. Terry, somebody, you want to say something, Terry?
Yeah, I don't have that number. I think Shane did my predecessor had done a study, and Terry, you might remember that number.
It was just over $5 million.
Right.
In 1 year.
Astronomical. Anybody else? Okay.
Okay, we can move on to the street fund. So in this fund, you see an increase in sales taxes. That is due to the Belton Town Center TIF paying off and a 2% overall estimate for increased inflation on sales throughout the city, and then also an amount allocated for a partial year of Chewy sales tax revenue. The motor vehicle fuel tax is just trending down, so that budget was decreased a little bit. And then for expenditures, we have a one-step increase for all eligible employees on their anniversary date, and the increased estimated costs of benefits totaling $75,500. That seems a little bit high, and I think that is due to changes in how we budget for health, dental, and vision is if we have a vacant position, we budget for family coverage. If we have employees that change, so I think we had a lot of employees in the prior year that had single coverage, and then as we got new employees, we have more that have higher or have family coverage instead, so it costs the city a little bit more for benefits. Other than that, we have $75,000 in building maintenance in these operating lines. Again, I really want to move that to capital. If you guys don't have any hesitation about that, I plan on doing that. The Public Works billing is up about $17,000, and that is the new positions. Then we have street striping, an increase of $45,000 over the previous year. Street preservation costs up $29,000, and then an additional $7,000 for the street lights. And then we have capital outlay in the street fund, and we have $980,000 for the Apple Valley stormwater and paving overlay, and these funds are in addition to the bond overlay project money that we talked about at the last meeting in the capital project fund. We also have $32,000 budgeted for regulatory street signs, $75,000 for the road for the dog park, $87,000 for a track skid loader, $463,800 total of equipment. And then we have for the vehicle equipment replacement allocation, that amount is up to $556,264.
Questions, Stephanie? I'm sorry, Councilwoman Davidson.
That's all right. My name is Stephanie. Line 17, the street preservation program. I know you said that that's related to Apple Valley. So why is that not included with that project? I thought that we were doing Apple Valley as part of our Prop R.
Part of the money that we get goes into stormwater pipe, and some of it goes into paving. This is mainly doing, a lot of that money is going into the stormwater pipe. The rest of the money is going into doing our regular patching that we do throughout the city.
Okay.
So that's not all Apple Valley.
Okay.
That's one major component.
So when you're doing Apple Valley and you have to tear up a piece of road to do the other part, would that patch then come from the project, the Prop R?
We're only
versus-
doing I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
We're only doing a temporary patch right now. If you've seen the first cut we made, it's just temporary patch. A lot of the pipe that we're replacing are in people's front yards or backyards, so there's actually no street to it.
Okay. And then line 21, the dog park road, $75,000.
I thought that was actually pretty cheap because we're doing it ourselves with our own labor.
Oh my goodness. So what, can you expand on that?
So there's the connection that's by Aspen Dental in front of Menards.
Yep.
And so we're just building a short section of asphalt road from there down to where the dog park is going to be constructed. There'd be no curb and gutter, no improvements. It'd be an unimproved street. Just us grading it, getting compaction, and just paving it.
And that is part of, maybe I'm getting wires crossed, but is that related to the North Point apartment complex? Yeah, okay.
That was our 50% participation, or is there another part that we're doing?
No, this isn't a 50-50. This is a different project. When we looked at it and we were talking about wanting to do the dog park in this location, they would take care of the bridge work that's going to be entailed and the trail work that will be entailed there. And then they looked to the city to be able to do the roads, and we agreed to that entry road in.
Councilman Trutzel.
Greg, what is the criteria for the striping? The reason why I bring that up is that I noticed on Missouri roads, they're striping at night especially when it rains, it flat disappears. You cannot see it. What is the criteria for the selection of the paint?
Well, cities or anybody who has striping there's a retro reflectivity number you have to maintain. And I'm not going to get into that to really bore you to death. But you have to make it where you can see the stripes at a certain rate. However, when it rains, the way that stripe works is there's little tiny glass beads that sit on top of paint. So when it rains, the water actually covers those up so you can't see the stripe during rain. So it really doesn't matter what type of materials you use. If the rain gets heavy enough, it covers the stripe and they don't work.
Sorry, I think that's not a good answer. I mean, it's a good answer, but not what I like. Thank you.
Wow. Interesting. Any other questions or comments there? Okay.
Okay. Next is the Capital Improvement Sales Tax Fund. We have an increase in sales tax revenue for the exact same reason as in the street fund. Both half-cent sales taxes. And then you can see that we're getting money from the Cornerstone Point TDD. Those reimbursements have declined, and I'm positive that that is due to the pandemic. So hopefully that will come back, but I did budget lower for next year. We don't have a transfer to the general fund budgeted for this current year. That $700,000 was being transferred to the general fund to pay for the new software that was in last year's budget. And that's the only changes for that fund. The park sales tax fund, also an increase of revenues of $416,000, also a half-cent sales tax. And then their only change in their operating expense, or in what they've been doing, is they're planning to increase the transfer that they make to their operating fund to help the operating fund stay afloat. And then the last fund is the General Obligation Bond Fund. And we have an increase in property tax revenue. Again, that is due to the assessed valuation of personal property. And we're also planning on issuing the remaining street bonds. There will actually be a resolution, a go-to-market resolution on the next meeting's agenda for you guys to approve, so that we can issue those remaining street bonds. We're going to move the project funds to the capital project fund. You can see that it's a little bit more. We're planning, if rates stay the same, where we are able to sell our bonds at a premium to generate additional funds for projects. And then like I said, we're planning on issuing new street bonds next year, so we'll have new debt service payments to pay for those. And that was an hour and 15 minutes. But to be fair, I didn't do all the talking. You guys had a lot of questions, and I actually I actually like that. I like it when you guys ask questions. So,
Questions or comments on that last part? Yes? Councilman Clark?
Mr. Mayor, I mean, I got some comments, of course, I'm always right. One of the things I look at when I look at this budget process, I look at I've been on here, it's been almost 2 years, and water's been one of the main topics we talked about since I've been around. And when I look at Roman numeral 1 of our budget book, it shows water cost is not being highlighted, and I think we as a council need to start looking at that more importantly and moving that forward. We have codes, code enforcement, infrastructure, crime, trash. I know where trash is. Trash should be down. I mean, we don't have issues with trash, but we do have issues with water cost. So one of the things that I want to look at is trying to help reduce water cost. And again, we get back into public works billing, and we were told it's all for engineering. Would it not be better to hire engineers for the water department? instead of paying the city money for engineering, hire its own engineers. It's paid out of the water fund. And instead of transferring 1.2 million, I think Public Works is like, his whole budget's like $1 million. So, I mean, I just think it could be a way to save money is by hiring engineers directly for the water and sewer department. Thank you.
Now, will we need to talk about that in a work session? What will we need?
Well, so, Greg, why don't you talk about what your engineers do?
So I have 3 engineers that work for me, and they work in all different areas that we have. So some days do stormwater work, some days they do sanitary sewer work, some days they're building a culvert, some days they're doing water line work, some days they're doing street work, sometimes they're doing traffic signals. So every day they do something different, and they all do work on all these different areas. And so I think that's how come they get transferred, we pay them, and then that money gets distributed back to the different funds.
But my question gets into, Mayor, is Public Works billing between water and sewer is transferring about $1.2 million this year budget cycle. Public Works' whole budget is less than $1 million. So again, one of the things that I thought of is hiring dedicated engineers, so we're not transferring $1.2 million and it's built into the water and sewer fund. I mean, if we can save $1 million by hiring our own engineers for those specific funds, then I think maybe that's the direction we need to look at going.
Okay, what would be the effect, or can you?
I'm sorry, Councilman Clark, I think I need to explain a little. So it's the cost is, okay, so if we look at the general fund at page 2, that the total amount of the Public Works billing revenue should equal, if I did it right, it should equal the 948, 890 for the Public Works expenditure line item, plus the garage operations 191, 380, minus, okay, follow me, minus the revenue that the other departments are paying for the garage, which is on page, five, vehicle servicing, plus the capital outlay amounts for Public Works, for the Public Works Department, the capital outlay. So you have equipment in the general fund for Public Works for the capital outlay, and so that should all equal the total amount.
Yeah, that 1.2 I see on the one page is probably bringing the street, so, but if you just did solid waste and you did water, I still think it's over $1 million. I mean, it's like $1.1 million. I just know last year by increasing the water rates 10%, it generated it generated about $600,000 by increasing the water rates 10%. If we can reduce our obligation by $1 million or $800,000, I think we can go back to keeping our water rates stable. I'm just looking for alternatives to keep our water rates down. I mean, I hear it every day. People talk to me about water rates. Again, I ran on trying to reduce water rates for people 2 years ago. So again, I'm going to keep asking, what can we do to keep our water rates down?
I think it's fair. What do you have, Councilman?
You're assuming you're saving $1 million or thereabouts. You're not going to save $1 million because, number one, you're going to end up paying outside engineers to do whatever it is. You have a problem also in coordination. I need something done 30 days out, 45 days out, and they say, well, I can get to you in 6 months. There's a problem in coordination there. My mother-in-law passed away here, I've been paying her bills, and the city of Kansas City obviously the house is empty, zero water going through there, it's like a $45 bill. That's nothing. I mean, that's just what it is. People complain. I read an article the other day that says they complain about water because they can complain about it. But can they complain about what they charge their cell phone bill? What can they complain about what they charge for their internet or their TV service? And all those are much more expensive than water. And I guarantee you, you got to have water. You have somebody broke water line, they're on your line right away. So, it's really a question of, what is your priority? And if your priority is not to have 50 channels or 100 channels, 200 channels or TV, they can cut their bill down a bunch. It's a matter of what is it. But like I said, her bill is right at $47, I think, a month for zero water.
Well, first of all, Councilman Troutz, I wasn't looking for outside engineering. I was hiring inside engineers specifically for the water and sewer and not using public works so we can save that money is what I'm looking for. So, hey, maybe over in your ward, you guys don't have people that care about water costs, but in my ward, I have a lot of people that reach out to me about water costs. So, again, concerns, yes. I mean, I paid $270 this month for water costs. I mean, it's expensive.
How many showers you taking a day? Well, I'm kidding. Oh, it doesn't hurt to talk about this. In a democracy, we waive all, This is important that we have this discussion. It is really important. But we want to get this resolved tonight. Yes, sir.
Probably covering some of the same. I think we can figure out a way to probably avoid raising this year. What I don't see through all this conversation and weighing everything we have to do is how to sustain that. And what you had mentioned, Councilman Clark, is how to reduce or sustain. And we've still got this issue with replacing the water mains and catching up to where we were at from years past where it wasn't. So I think I can figure out some numbers. I don't think it's sustainable though, and that's where I could use a little help if there's something there that I'm missing, and I'm certainly not that sharp, but I don't see how to sustain it. A bond issue would be a possibility, but in the long run, I believe it's going to cost the citizens more than the way we're doing it. And the reason I believe it's going to cost more than the way we're doing it is we had that discussion when we was trying to figure out a better way to get there a few years ago when we set this step in place. So again, we can save here, cost there. I don't know. I can't put it all together yet. So I think we all have the desire to, but we got to see the numbers and we got to see how it's going to affect in every direction. So I just want to make those comments, and I'm having trouble figuring that one out. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Where do we go with this? What's the direction?
There's a public hearing next week on the budget, and I was going to it's time for the first reading of the ordinance adopting a budget. Then, we can still make changes to it until you guys do the second reading, which will be 4 weeks from tonight.
Okay. Comments on that?
Mayor, I'd like to make one last comment. I know there's been a lot of conversation tonight about the water rates and where we're at. The one thing I want to clarify is what staff has brought to you in the form of this budget, and I believe the council understands this, but I just need to clarify it, is that I would ask, and I was going to do this at the beginning, is don't shoot the messengers. We're trying to bring a plan that addresses the need to address 25 miles of water line. And we talked extensively about it, as Councilman Savage said, last year, about the best approach to be able to do it. What are our options? Do we pay as we go? Do we do a bond issuance? Are there other avenues to be able to do that? And I had somebody mention to me the other day about, yes, you could do an assessment, and just in those neighborhood areas, you could do an assessment. The calculations are extremely high. And so the approach has been by the city is that the entire city pays for the improvements as we go. And so we've continued that approach and trying to do it systematically. Nobody wants to see a water rate increase. I understand it. I don't want to see it at my house either. But at some point in years past, the approach of attempting to replace our water lines and making sure that we had the dollars there to do it didn't occur. And so we've got to be able to look at that, and that's what this plan and this budget does tonight.
Yes, Councilman Clark.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'm not trying to kill the messenger. My problem gets into is we've generated almost probably another $2 million for general funds between paying off TIFs, bringing in a company that's going to generate a bunch of money for us in the sales tax revenue. And I don't see any of it going to the citizens. And that's where I think we need to start taking a hard look and putting some of that money back into the citizens who are paying the highest tax rate in Cass County. We probably have one of the highest levy rates in Cass County. So I just think sometimes we got to give back to the citizens, especially when we're the ones hearing about the water increase and the cost. So that's just my 2 cents.
So,
Sir?
I think, would staff care to comment to that, where those funds are going back to the citizens at?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Savage. Actually, this entire budget, the city doesn't make a widget. The city provides a service. And you look at any of the accounts that are there where you have employees, we're providing that service back to the citizens, whether it's through our public safety, if it's through our water department, through our wastewater, through our parks, through our golf. And then the areas of this budget this year that we're looking at is adding additional positions in the form of a corrections officer and 3 dispatchers and a detective. And the reason we're doing that is because as the city has grown in our retail and in our commercial, we are growing and we have more people coming to the other area, and those services are needed to be able to address. We in the last week have lost another dispatcher. Dispatchers are probably one of the most high intensity jobs that you're going to see in the police department. Nothing against detectives. And
Wow.
And
They've got the toughest job in the department.
they do. They absolutely do. And in the 4 years that I've been here, I've been asked by the chief and Lieutenant Shriver, who is over communications, to please provide those 3 additional dispatchers. They desperately need it for that relief. And so we looked at that area this year. So it's being able to provide that a service to the citizens, and we do that through the staff support that we have here.
So that's something then that we could make a decision and change if we wanted to, take it off staff, but you're presenting it that way as a needed piece, and you just explained why. So that's an area, if we wanted to take a step and say we really don't want to do that we could direct staff to do. I'm not sure that I support that either. I need, again, further insight on that, where I trust in the staff that they have that and know the needs. So that would be an area. I'm not recommending we do it necessarily, but that'd be an area to talk about.
Councilwoman Davidson.
Yeah, I'm open to that idea, and I'll tell you why. So at the beginning of tonight's session, we, were presented with the year in review from the police department. And by all accounts, it looks like we're performing well. a lot of our numbers are down. It's hard to quantify what exactly those percentages may be due to the pandemic and just less people being mobile, but I think when you look at those numbers, you know, I mean, I hate to tell anybody that we can't do anything. I'd hate to tell the police department that we're not going to give you dispatchers or whatever you need, and then also, but that just means telling people, hey, we can't take a look at your water rates this year either. I mean, no, somebody's not going to be happy regardless. So, I mean, personally for me, I would be open to having that conversation.
So I'm gonna comment on that, and certainly I'm open to conversation, because that's how you get somewhere from here, but what we're really not necessarily telling any department what they can or cannot have. What we gotta decide is, can we provide the service to the citizens without providing these positions? Or what are we gonna be lacking, or how short are we gonna be lacking in that area? Because ultimately, it's about service to citizens.
How much, Sheila, is that, have you done the figures on how much money that would be that, with no increase?
The dispatchers total $186,700, and the jailer totaled $60,742. I do know that also the fire department, chief person isn't here, but the fire department has also been requesting for the last several years additional dispatchers, and so if you'd like to hear from Chief Sapp, I think he can explain why not only the police but also the fire department believes that dispatchers are needed.
Well, the first thing that I thought I heard mentioned a minute ago maybe is that this additional dispatcher would lighten the load or give more time off of the current ones, which there is some truth to that. But what my position has been, even before I was appointed to this position, is that most of the time they'll have two dispatchers in the dispatch room. One is assigned to take calls and communicate with fire units. The other is to communicate with police department. Now, call volumes and different things happen, and they switch back and forth a little bit. But what we see both, I don't know if Chief Person is still on, but even though you got to see some statistics that say, hey, these actual crimes that they were reporting to whatever group that was are down, that doesn't mean that their call volume isn't. I know my call volume trends upward. I'm sure his probably does too. There he is. So with every increased call, that's more of us out on the road all the time doing things. It's more communications that the dispatchers have to have. And my point behind asking for it, it was hopefully getting 3 dispatchers in the seats more often, so that we'll have one dedicated call taker, one person dedicated to communicate with us, one person dedicated to communicate with police department, which is a huge increase in the safety factor for us. It also benefits the citizen, might not be a Belton citizen, whoever calls 911, in that they can get their calls taken quicker. If you take times like today, or yesterday, today, you don't always have that increased call volume, but it definitely slows the service down. I don't know if Chief Person has anything to add to that, but.
A couple things that I would add. We in the Belton Police Department, the city of Belton, our dispatchers will answer more calls, telephone calls, radio calls, calls for service than the other agencies in the county, with the exception of at times the sheriff's department. We do that with fewer dispatchers than what our neighboring agencies have. Raymore keeps 3 dispatchers on. The county keeps a minimum of 3 dispatchers on. We try to keep 2 dispatchers on at a time. We have we should have 8 dispatchers and a supervisor. There's no way that you can keep 2 dispatchers on all the time with that number of personnel. Plus, we're always hiring or training someone back in dispatch. So we end up paying a lot of overtime just trying to staff our levels at 2 dispatchers at a time. If we had that third dispatcher, we could ensure that we had 2 on scheduled all the time, with 3 that would give relief for days off, holidays, sick time, vacation time. It takes that many people in order to staff the number of dispatchers that are required. It takes 1.6 employees, a minimum of 1.6 employees to staff 1 position. So that is why we have requested that for several years. And it would allow for one of those dispatchers to always be assigned to fire and EMS duty instead of having to split their time the way they do right now.
Councilman Clark.
I might have missed that, I apologize, but can we not pay for dispatchers through the public safety sales tax, or?
We do not. The public safety sales tax only is covering salaries for the union positions. The union positions, FOP positions.
And that was ballot language, wasn't it?
It wasn't ballot language, but it was the public safety sales tax doesn't generate more money, like enough money to cover the dispatchers. So it was, that was what we used in order to establish the base when we initially did it. And so, but there's not enough funds being generated from the public safety sales tax to cover the dispatchers.
So you're saying, I mean, Chief, you can answer this question, persons. So the jailers or the dispatchers can't join the FOP because they're not a certified police officer, or?
That is correct. The FOP covers commissioned police officers between the rank of patrolman, or patrol officer, and sergeant.
Yes. Where are we going here?
Those are the only positions that are subject to the CBA, patrol officer, master patrol officer, investigations, and the sergeants.
And just for clarification, one of the reasons that we picked the positions that were being covered by the FOP is we promised citizens that money would be going to people on the street. And so we didn't want anyone accusing the city of taking that public safety sales tax money and using it towards command staff and administration. And we did that for both police and fire.
I mean, I guess as an individual, I look at dispatchers and jailers as different than administration personally. I mean, I look at them part of the police force and part of public safety. I mean, we're trying to get dispatchers as a first responder in the state right now. So, I mean, it's, you know, I look at them differently. Of course, I've been involved in this area of my life, so I understand it. So, but yeah, I look at them as part of the public safety of our community too.
So, and please let me explain that the public safety sales tax for the police is expected to generate $1,187,500 of revenue next year. And the salary and benefits for the FOP positions totals 1 million, including the new detective, is $1,089,290. There is not enough money being generated by the public safety sales tax fund to cover more than the FOP positions.
Questions, comments? Sir, Councilman Van Wink, I'm sorry. Was there somebody else? Okay, go ahead.
When you say that there's not enough of that sales tax to cover it, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's more money involved in the police and the fire budget than just what the sales tax is coming in, correct?
Yes, it would come, yes.
And that is also tied to the ballot language where we weren't gonna cut our budget on police and fire just because we got the citizens to pass this. This was additional money so we could add police and fire positions and get them the equipment they would need in a timely fashion and so forth, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So the amount that I am talking about that I read, that was 1,089,290. That is the FOP positions above the amount that the general fund was paying in the base year.
Thank you.
And that's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, when we first did this, it was only for the 6 additional officers?
The police got, oh
10
gosh,
it
3 or
was for 10 officers. It was to replace 4 that had been eliminated through budget cuts in previous years, and 6 additional.
Police, I see, Chief Persons, apologize if that was loud. I saw you added, looks like 5 new officers the other day. Where's that put us now in being at 100%?
We are still, because we have another one in training that had been out for a while, but that still leaves us another 4 shy, I believe.
Thank you.
4 or 5.
Well, what we got, where we at? We're talking about doing the first reading next time and go from there and make adjustments as we go, if that's what the council wants and we discuss it. Is that all right with everybody? Sir?
Councilman Clark had some obviously good ideas or some ideas regarding what we might have options to change things. I would encourage council members, if they have those kind of ideas, to get something to the staff, but as soon as possible, so they'll have a fair amount of time, fair meaning fair to them, to have time to look at those options and come back with some viable information that we can consider prior to this first reading. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have enough to go on now yet? Do we have enough direction? So we're okay. So are we ready to close the work session? At this time, adjourn the work session. Do we need to take a 5-minute break? Let's do that. 5 minutes, please.
Second on that?
Is everybody here? All right. We're going to call the meeting to order again, February 9th. At this time, we're going to be led to Pledge of Allegiance by Councilman Van Winkle. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. We have a roll call.
Mayor Davis.
Here.
Councilmember Savage.
Here.
Councilmember Lathrop.
Here.
Councilmember Trutzel.
Here.
Councilmember Van Winkle.
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Finn. Councilmember Davidson.
Here.
Councilmember Peak.
Okay. Next on, we don't have any personal appearances. Consent agenda. One motion, non-debatable, to approve the recommendations noted. Any member of the council may ask for an item be taken from the consent agenda for discussion and separate action.
Second.
Get it? We got a motion and a second. Discussion. Councilwoman Davidson.
I'd like to look at E.
B.
No, E as in Edgar.
Edgar, okay. Is that the only one?
You caught on to that. Let's discuss D as well. D as in dog.
Okay, so we're pulling D and E. Any others? Seeing none, we'll pull those two. Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion passes. Okay, D, a motion approving resolution R 2021-04.
A resolution approving the engagement of the Missouri State Auditor's Office to audit the city records pursuant to a citizen petition audit.
Second.
Motion and second. Okay, you're up.
I was just looking for an explanation for this one.
The state auditor's office it requested that we send back the signed engagement letter.
Okay. Good enough for me.
Okay. Do we need to go ahead? Yes, sir, on the audit.
On the audit, where are we getting the money from to pay for this?
There's $150,000 included in this year's budget.
I thought it was gonna cost around $1 million.
$150,000.
I'm out of here if it's $1 million.
And that money come from where?
The general fund.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
I have one other question.
Sir.
Sheila, you said 150 on that audit, is that correct?
They're estimating between $100,000 and $150,000, yes.
What percentage of our general fund is that? Fun
Over
question.
1%.
Like 1%.
1%, yeah. So 1% is what we're gonna allocate for this audit.
Yes, and just so everyone knows, staff is trying to comply with their requests as quickly as possible because we know that the faster we can give them the information, the faster they can get their work done, and hopefully it will end up costing the citizens less.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Any other discussion? Sir.
Are they in person, or are they doing everything remotely, or how are they handling this?
Both.
Are they been here already then? Okay.
Any other discussion or questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. E, motion approving resolution R 2021-05.
A resolution approving Amendment Number 1 to Task Agreement Number 2020-5 with Wilson and Company in the amount of $70,121 for a total amount of $690,592.10 to redesign North Cass Parkway alignment and design a precast arch structure on North Cass Parkway over East Creek funded via Belton Cass TDD.
Present.
Motion is second. Discussion. Councilwoman Davidson.
Yeah, I was just kind of really wanting to inquire about the precast arch structure, if somebody could talk about that.
Well, let's let hers first. Go
No,
ahead.
I said I didn't hear a question.
Oh, okay.
I was just inquiring about the precast arch structure part of it.
A precast arch structure, instead of using a standard bridge which has 2 concrete abutments and then you put beams on top of it, this actually comes as a precast. It's made actually in Illinois, and they haul them over here and they just actually put the different sections next to each other. And so you actually, within a couple of days, a bridge is assembled. And so it comes pre-made, kind of like Lincoln logs. You just bring them out and send them, or Legos, I should say. Kids don't know what Lincoln logs are anymore. To assemble it very quickly.
Okay, thank you. I read the information that we had, and I was confused because I thought that there was some like decorative art element that I was missing in the description, so I'm glad I asked.
Are you anti-art?
Absolutely
Okay,
not.
I just kidding. All right. Any other discussion?
Yeah,
Councilman?
the engineering part of this, I understand. How are we coming along for possible construction from a financial standpoint? Are we getting there, or are we out a while yet?
Go. On the North Cass Parkway, I'm like, drawing.
It's being reimbursed by the TDD.
I know that it is, but how are they coming along? Is the money gonna be there when this is engineered? I think that's a more direct question. I was gonna try not to do that, but.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't attend those meetings. Do you? You two do.
Chet's there, he can tell you. Oh, oh, yes, I am too.
They're getting closer along, and what they're looking at right now is I'm sorry, it took me a minute to just
That's
catch up
fine.
with this project. What they're looking at right now is completing the promise that they made to citizens to go through and what that would look like to make sure that all of this is engineered, knowing that they're still taking care of other things along the way. So they've been taking care of the easements and the right-of-ways and taking care of those. There's a couple of properties that need to take to condemnation and take care of. They are still a little bit away of having the funds to be able to do the widening portion, but they're still working towards that goal.
So we're probably looking at, you don't like the shotgun things, but by the time we get the property we need, that's gonna push us out. Probably this whole deal here is gonna push us out another year. We're talking about maybe 3 years possibly.
I'm thinking 3 to 5 years.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I have one.
Got it.
You don't look down this way very far. Are we getting reimbursed for our time spent on this?
There's do you recall when there was funds that were allocated to the city to be able to do separate projects? That's the city's portion of the funds that we get from the TDD. Is that correct, Patrick?
The city and the TDD have entered into a cooperative agreement, I think it was about 10 years ago, where the city does get reimbursed for its specifically professional expenses from the TDD. And then construction expenses as well come from the TDD. We just are acting as essentially the first person to do it and then get reimbursement from the TDD through that cooperative agreement.
And the other question I had is, they want to build a road and then Belton take it over. Is that correct?
Correct.
We will own it after, at the end.
That's not in the city limits yet. It's a county road, so why are we taking it over?
Is that a motion that we annex all the way down there? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I saw Belton City's sign down there the other day.
Okay.
Anyway, that's my question.
Well, being on that committee since the onset for 10 years, what did we just get back from the city of Belton get back from the TDD? We just got back what, money-wise?
Well, but Mayor, that was for their eats,
Right,
and I don't remember what the amount was, but
400,000 is what I'm talking about. From the TDD, they owed us that money back.
so they're reimbursing us for funds
Right.
that we spent
Right.
on their behalf.
So, yeah, and it's going a lot quicker recently than, and Greg's in the middle of that, but it's going a lot faster right now.
Well, I had one other question that bothered me. We had a 4-lane road come up from the interchange up to Cambridge. Now we're putting another 4-lane road going down there a mile away. It doesn't make sense to me to have two. The other one, we already have a 2-lane into the 4-lane right-of-way.
Okay, I'm trying to
I don't know,
visualize that.
it just, you know, within a mile, we got two main lines down through there.
Well, as development goes, it goes, what, the TDD goes all the way south to 187th Street, doesn't it, Chet? Yeah. It goes all the way down to 187th Street. You got to know that that's one of those futuristics. It's kind of like the Marquee. It goes all the way to Prospect, and we're waiting on that one too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a futuristic. Here we go. But it's getting really close on Cambridge.
Well, it just that we had so many other things. It was basically the same thing. Y Highway, years ago, I was on the committee on that to widen it 4-lane from 58 all the way down to the city limits, and that failed to go. And then Cambridge was supposed to be from Y Highway to Peculiar Drive. It was going to be a 4-lane divided road, and we had two engineers 2 different times on that one, because the first one, when I first moved out here, they had it, and we're going to get a 4-lane road out there, and then a few years later, about 12 years later, they had another study, the same thing, says after 10 years they have to have another.
Right.
We spent a bunch of money, and we've got neither one of those roads done. I don't know, that was just a comment. That just, I think about this every time, but Y Highway was a big one. The state was involved on that, and the state and the Mid-America Regional Council, and somewhere or another it got bogged down.
But this is a part of the strategic planning that we've done here in Belton, and it's going to blossom. It's coming down the pike. Thank you for your comments. Anybody else on this? No more discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. Regular agenda. A motion approving the final reading of Bill number 2021-03.
An ordinance approving the final plat for the Encore, a tract of land in the southwest quarter of Section 12, Township 46, Range 33 in the city of Belton, Cass County, Missouri, and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to sign the plat for recording with the Cass County Recorder's Office.
Present.
Motion is second. Discussion. Seeing none.
Mayor Davis,
Aye.
Councilmember Savage,
Aye.
Davidson,
Aye.
Pretzel,
Aye.
Van Winkle,
Aye.
Lathrop,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Finn.
Aye.
That motion passes. Okay. B, a motion approving resolution R 2021-07.
A resolution approving task agreement number 2021-1 with Trek Design Group LLC in the amount of $78,189.80 to design water lines in conflict with the storm sewer for the Hargis Lake Stormwater Improvements Project.
Present.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion. Seeing none. Oh, they've got it here on a second vote for me again. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. C, a motion approving resolution R 2021-08.
A resolution of the City of Belton, Missouri approving an economic development incentives policy.
Present.
Second.
Motion and a second. We got discussion, yes. Councilman Trutzel.
There is a bit of amendment that's on the council's desk there. We need the motion to amend the proposed document here to include the page 11 and page 14 in the city of Belton economic development policy.
You need to amend so you want to add that.
Have we read enough into the motion, Patrick?
I think that all that would be necessary is for the motion to reference the two revisions that are in front of the council and as presented to council. So if you would like, it would be a motion to amend the proposed resolution to include the following inserts in the City of Belton Economic Development Policy presented to council on February 9th, 2021.
That's what I said.
That's his motion. Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. Okay, are we done with that one now?
Need a vote on the other one?
No, I'll need you to reread, please,
Reread it again, okay.
as amended.
C, motion approving resolution R 2021-08
As amended.
as amended.
Thank you.
Mayor?
And the
first?
motion's already on the table.
Does he need to withdraw his first motion then?
The motion's already on the table. He just needed to read as amended.
Oh, as a minute, okay.
As amendment, here we go. Do we have, what do we need, a motion and a second?
We
Already
already
been
have a
motioned.
motion.
We already have it, so all in favor again?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. City Council liaison reports. What we have, Park?
I'll try to make this brief. With the current wintry forecast in place, it's a great time to remind our members of our inclement weather policy. We will assess road conditions and make a decision by 4 a.m. on weekdays, 6 a.m. on Saturdays, and 7 a.m. on Sundays if a delayed opening or closing of High Blue Wellness Center is necessary. If so, we will contact the local news media for inclusion on their scrolling cancellation delays, email members, and post the website and social media outlets. We appreciate your patience and understanding, and please know that the safety of our staff and members is always our top priority. Registration is now underway for spring classes. Active Stars offers both karate and cheer classes for kids 14 through 17. You can register now via their Facebook page. They have a link for you to join the fun. Belton Parks is also now accepting applications for summer camp positions. That includes assistant directors, counselors, concessions, rec facility supervisors. You can apply online at beltonparks.org/jobs, or just drop by the front desk at High Blue Wellness Center for an application. High Blue Wellness Center is also having a paint party this Friday, February 12th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Limited spaces available due to COVID, and this one is open to kids or adults in case you need a Valentine's date. Prepackaged snacks and all supplies are provided for $25 for the first family member and $20 for each additional. You can email info@beltonparks.org for more information. And then the last update is don't miss out on playing in one of our premier recreation leagues this spring. Sign-ups are underway in the following programs. Youth programs include soccer, football, volleyball, softball. The little ones include Little Kickers and Advanced Little Kickers and Little Diggers. Your early bird deadline and fee vary by league, so sign up and check those out at teamsideline.com/Belton. Thank you.
Breathe. That was a breath. Thank you. Okay, Mayor's Communication. I was at a CCCED, Cass County Coalition Economic Development. I had a good meeting. It was a marathon, like a 3-hour meeting, but it was well attended. It was good. Talking about small businesses, capital, they're getting it all set up. Workforce, working on that again. A lot of good things happening, and it shows our regionalism. We're real big believers in regionalism amongst the county, and it's working out really well. The other thing is, Greg, I'm going to tag on you, is that what can we tell the public about these water breaks, what they should be doing to make sure that, I mean, it's supposed to get really bad this weekend. So what should they be doing to make sure their pipes don't break?
Well, the biggest thing you can do is make sure that you don't lower the temperature in your house too much.
Yeah.
Keep cabinet doors open, and if you think something's starting to freeze, make sure you just run just a dribble of water. Dribble. Doesn't have to be much. As long as the water's moving, it won't freeze.
Got it. And I know my wife had everything just like that, because that is a terrible nightmare to wake up when you get a water leak. So with that then, I'm going to tomorrow. I've got the Little Blue sewer, the meeting tomorrow afternoon, or tomorrow afternoon. And it's interesting, I get to listen to all the stuff that's going around, all around the city. Are you going to be on that one too, that call? Okay. But that's a good one. It's fun to see and hear what's going on across the city. I'm talking about the Kansas City Metro. Okay. My last thing I think I have here is that, my wife used to be the bank manager at Bank of Belton for a lot of years. And she talked about, because they get audited, banks do every year, just like the city does. But she said that even though they had to do the audit, they still had to do their daily work. And they had to stay late to do it every day to make sure they have the day's business done. Our staff has worked their backsides off. They work late. They're getting audited and doing their regular work. They can't go home until they get it done. And we really appreciate what they've done. And it's spectacular to see. I mean, I don't know how they do it. It's just incredible. So you guys got kudos. You're doing great. City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Wanted to just remind everybody that our meetings will be in this room going forward, and as you can see from the new setup, when we looked at purchasing these items, these type of things are very expensive. So I want to give kudos out to the Public Works Department. Greg, I don't know if you've got any kudos you want to then extend out, but just say thanks to all of them for putting these items together for us and keeping us safe and allowing us to social distance. Great job in helping us set up the room.
It was Clayton and our transportation crew that did it.
Perfect. Thank them so much. Appreciate it. And that's all that I have tonight.
Well, thank you, ma'am. I've got here next, I've got communication from City Council. Councilman Savage.
I do, and I kind of knew it before I voted on that 2021-1. That's showing to be funded out of the water line replacement, and I still believe that should be funded out of the stormwater. It's because it's being generated by that. Am I correct on that part of it? So if you were locked into that, then I would like to see that back on the agenda as per, I was on the prevailing side. I'd like to see that put back so I can redirect how I want that funded.
Patrick, are you going to chime in on that? How do we do this?
So that would be a motion to reconsider from Councilmember Savage. That would obviously need a second and then a vote for reconsideration at the next city council meeting.
Well, I'll make that motion to reconsider.
At the next meeting, right?
At the next meeting. Yes,
Okay.
next regular
I
meeting.
have a question. What item are you speaking about? What letter on the agenda?
2021-1 with the
Oh,
design
task
for the
agreement
water
2021. Oh, resolution 7? Okay.
for the track design for the design of the water line that's having to be moved because of the sewer storm sewer replacement or relocation.
Okay,
I
everybody
believe-
understand? Sir, go ahead, Patrick.
I think Sheila's about to answer the question too as well.
I believe that, yes, the resolution doesn't say where it's coming from. It's just the backup information.
The backup information does say where it's coming from though, and that
Backup does.
concerns me.
Yes, but the resolution that was approved doesn't identify the source of funds to be used.
Okay.
So there could still be, even after approval, a later resolution brought before the city council to potentially amend where the source of funds would come from,
I could
if
bring,
it's budgeted.
I could bring a budget amendment ordinance to the council to move the budget from the water.
Yeah, for a vote.
Okay, and so next week you guys can vote on, or in 2 weeks you can vote on that.
That'll work just fine.
And then Councilmember Savage, I'd ask you to withdraw your motion then.
I will withdraw.
Thank you.
Based on that info. Thank you.
Councilman Clark.
I just got something quick, and I think it's a MoDOT issue. I had a resident call me the other day, and she says that a lot of the lights out there on 58 and 49 are off, so it's very dark, and She would like to see if we could get MoDOT, is that MoDOT's responsibility for the, not the stoplights, but the overhead lights?
I have called them numerous times about streetlights. They're out throughout the metropolitan area. There are very few interchanges that are lit anywhere. And they say it's mainly due to copper theft, and they don't have the money to replace all the copper throughout the whole metropolitan area.
Thank you.
Wow. Councilman Lathrop.
Move to adjourn.
I'll second his motion.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.